I'll start off by introducing myself for those who don't know me. My name is Matt Watson, Tactical Operations Consulting. The class we're going to be going over today is Active Threat Response. It is a full-day class. We're going to start out the morning here in the classroom with some presentations, so if anything, it'll get you warmed up and allow the sun to kind of broach through the clouds, thank you, this afternoon. So hopefully it will be a little bit above freezing when we're actually outside. This is, my background is kind of a mix of military and law enforcement. I always put this up because I've found, especially with adult learners, people want to sit there and go, well, why are you talking to me? Why am I not up front teaching the class? Why are you the one? So this is just a brief overview of you, if you will, on why I'm teaching this block of instruction. For the last few years, I've been working in government service and spending majority of my time in places Africa, Middle East, North Africa. Those are my main areas of operation. So I've been present and working with friendly nations on helping develop anti-terrorism and counterterrorism policies and techniques. So here domestically, I've spent a lot of time teaching active shooter training. Everything from military special law enforcement special operations units to civilians. We do a separate presentation for like church security teams. Currently working with the DC Synagogue Association, coming up with a program for them as well. And then just some different certifications. On the medical side, I have a mix of military and civilian EMS. As a medic in the Army, I was a flight medic, trained a lot of non-medical people on life-saving skills. Domestically, I still teach the Stop the Bleed class, which we're going to go over today, as well as a gunshot wound first aid course and FAST course, which is the Red Cross's version of Stop the Bleed. So with that, our focus here today is active shooter, active threat events. And to get it started, you know, this is just a basic definition. I'm sure if you keep up with this topic, you're already familiar with some version of this. This is the FBI's. As a side note, I tend to talk fast and move around a lot. I'm going to try and cram as much information in a short period of time, and I move around a lot because it's hard to hit a moving target. So with that, you can see several things on that definition. We're looking at it as one or more individuals. Now, you're here today because this is an area of interest, so you're probably up to date on a lot of the things we're going to be covering this morning. If you have any questions or you're like, hey, I read this, I heard this, somebody in the restroom at the bar told me that, share with the group, and you know that might be something that is for the betterment of all. Or you're like, I heard this, is it true? And maybe we can kind of clarify some things for you as well. So, history, because that's how we help to predict future events, because we do not have a crystal ball. So we have to look at things that happened in the past to kind of prepare us for the future. Looking at that chart for 13 years, what do you notice is probably the most predominant area of these incidents? Oh, this is an interactive class, if I didn't voice that at the beginning. So where are the majority of them? Yeah, commerce. And that could be anything from a business that's open to pedestrian traffic, which would be what? Give me an example. Yeah, a mall, any kind of retail storefront. What about a business that's closed to foot traffic? What would that be? Maybe a FedEx distribution center, you know, a warehouse, something of that sort, where you do not just have people showing up at the front door. Instead, it is a controlled population in theory. Beyond that, moving down, probably the next highest, looking at the chart, is education. And that can be everything pre-K through 12 to higher education, universities and that sort of thing. What about looking at this 2016 to 2020, what do you notice? It's an increase. Now, why is this specifically disheartening when we look at 2020? What have we been dealing with in 2020? COVID, right? So if we're traveling less and we're out in public less, how is it that we're getting an increase in these events?
Mental health.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a key talking point.
It also depends on where you get these numbers, because they start sticking with what they define.
So to that end, let's look at where these numbers came from in particular. So 40 events, right? Of those in 19 states, 126 wounded, 38 killed. When you look at this, look at incident location, places of commerce. All right, 19 of those, so almost half of those events happened in places of commerce. 10 being open spaces, which we already addressed, malls, retail storefronts, things of that sort. Closed spaces. With the closed spaces, what do you think is the typical description of the violent offender? An employee or former employee, disgruntled employee, all right? So those are things that we are keeping in the kind of the back of our brain housing group. Here in Maryland, we had one just a few years ago. What do you remember from that? Anybody?
At the Navy Yard?
Well, there's the Navy Yard shooting, you know, but that's, I mean, yeah, I guess that is sort of Maryland-ish.
Capital.
Well, we've got that, but that's its own kind of unique moment in time.
Newspaper in
Capital newspaper is what I was thinking.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Yeah. So what we had. Yes. Yes. And that was here in Maryland just a few years ago. One of the things I want you to look at, though, with these 40 events, 2 incidents, the shooter was killed by armed citizens. 5 of these were considered mass killing, which is defined as 3 or more killings in a single incident. So we increased 33%, right, from 2019 to 2020. Once again, half of those incidents, places of commerce, which looking at our original pie chart for those 13 years, 2000 to 2013, that really stays consistent with our history. And so we already addressed maybe some of the reasons, because again, I'm not a psychologist and I'm not an epidemiologist to talk about, you know, epidemics. But it would, I think, be a fair statement that mental health played a crucial role in the increase of these incidents, given that there's less interaction. You know, how are we having more of these violent incidents when we're not leaving our homes? So we bring these things up not to scare you, which, you know, quite honestly, it is a little bit frightening, but instead is to identify where our sensitive areas are. All right. For those who might be familiar, on the military side and government side, we talk about hard targets versus soft targets. And this is what we're describing. A soft target, here are some examples, are areas that aren't typically hardened or protected against an assault. All right? A school, we like to think schools are secure, yes? You know, especially after the historic events, everything from Columbine in the 90s, you know, to more recent events. We like to think, okay, our schools are secure, but quite honestly, the schools are designed to do what? Educate. And how are they to present to the students? If I'm a let's say 6-year-old starting my first day of kindergarten, should I go through barbed wire, chain link fence, metal detector, canine, and then hand search? I shouldn't, right? Because the idea is this is a welcoming area, right? We want you to come, we want you to attend, this is a safe place for you. And so that's the challenge. The same thing when we start talking about hospitals or hotels or sporting events. These things are designed to be welcoming spaces. Could you envision a church, a synagogue, where you had to go through 4 levels of security, right? And then there's the strip search, and then the scatter gun, and then they're going to x-ray everything, and then you've got to go through all these different airlocks, you're not going to attend, because that's not what it was designed for. It was designed to be a welcoming space, but that's the challenge. These areas, you think about a hospital, if something bad were to happen into a hospital, well, where are the injured people going to go?
Hospital.
Yeah, well, if that's where the threat is, right, and that's where the shooting and the violence just occurred, now where do they go? Well, then there's another hospital. Yeah, because they're always so close together. So that presents its own unique challenges. Now, we start talking about what to expect. What do you notice with these 4 areas, for instance, as far as population goes? Are they heavily populated or sparsely populated? Yeah, I mean, that's what they're designed for, right? A hotel is designed to encapsulate a large number of people in a small footprint, right? That's why they build them up as opposed to wide. Hospitals are, again, you could have a 200, 300 bed hospital. You could have different wards, neonatal, and so on and so forth. Sporting events. Now that we've started opening up some of the restrictions, which may or may not turn back, but remains to be seen, you know, you're populating with massive amounts of people in a small footprint. So we're expecting mass casualties. Emergency response is going to be overwhelmed, because not only is the bad thing happening there, but what else is happening thanks to things like social media? Give you an example for Newtown, Connecticut. All right, that was the school shooting. There were reports of shooters running through the woods. And so what ended up happening with first responders? Did they go to the school where the shooter actually was? No, they were chasing off on these kind of wild goose chases, you know, looking for these other potential threats. And we can thank things like social media, where people get on their facey tweets, you know, and their smack books and chats and whatever. And they'll go, oh, hey, I heard this is happening and that and this and that. When the incident happened at the school shooting in Connecticut, the school was referenced, right, by name. In my community, the next county over, was another elementary school with the same name. So when it came on the news, people only half heard, and there was a mass parent overwhelming number, like a wave of parents rushing to the elementary school thinking that something was happening to their kids at their school. And that was in Connecticut, and this is in Virginia. Because again, we half listen, we sort of pay attention, and then things like social media ran rampant. So there's always a lack of information, bad information. And then, of course, you have the vultures who come out, because we want to get those emotional, dramatic images. So we're going to try and collapse down, then we're going to start asking questions, and why aren't the police sharing this information? They're hiding things. So we're going to make assumptions when we don't know all the facts, and then that's going to create more and more problems. Point is, this is chaos at its purest definition when we talk about these violent incidents. So thanks, Matt. That's another horrific image you decided to share with me first thing on a Saturday morning. Where are you going with this? Well, that's a great point. I'm glad you asked it. We need to identify what the threats have typically been. Now, when I say typically, that doesn't mean an all the time or every time. Instead, we've got to recognize averages, all right? I know everyone loves specifics in life, but sometimes we have to deal with averages. So on the average, if we look at previous incidents, oftentimes it's a single suspect, one individual, former employee, former student, former spouse, there's some former something or other, some type of relationship. It's very rare where we see someone target an area that does not have a relationship. Are there exceptions that you're immediately thinking of? Pulse nightclub shooting. The shooter didn't have a relationship with anyone in the club or anyone involved, and he kind of had his own lone wolf thing that was going on, right? Depending on your research, you might go, yes, well, he was claiming affiliation with ISIS affiliate. All right? One of the big challenges, we face in kind of counterterrorism, anti-terrorism is the next threat, which is the lone wolf threat. Somebody who does not have a solid, cohesive relationship with an organization. Instead, these organizations get on to the interwebs and they just share things like, hey, sign up for our newsletter if you want to make a bomb. Awesome. Yes, thank you. Check that block. And they essentially produce doctrine and people just self-radicalize. And they just decide to do these things and choose these targets. Sometimes they're suggested to them. Coming back around, majority of the time there is that single individual, there is some kind of relationship. Oftentimes it's a pistol, semi-automatic, but we've seen multiple weapons. Some situations, one of the mall shootings, it was an individual carrying a shotgun in a backpack. In that situation, he actually was a former employee of the store, and that's why he went there and shot the place up. This is in distinct contrast to what we had used to deal with in law enforcement, which was a hostage situation. You're coming in, bad guys coming in, and it's like, no one leave, give me all your money, it's a bank robbery, oh, it went sideways, now you're all hostages. And we would deal with that in a specific manner, because the end goal of the bad person was what? Survive, financial gain, get out, escape. These individuals, what's their focus? What's their game? Damage. Yeah, I mean, it's a kill. I hate to reference video games because too often we get caught up in the violence in video games and music and that rap stuff, and that's why people do what people do for a variety of reasons. We can't place them into these boxes. But very similar to video games where I gain more points by doing what? Killing. Right? I rack up more and more points. Oftentimes, we see a lot of these folks with that same mentality. Not blaming the video games, it's just there's a similarity in mindset. I'm racking up more kills. I'm going to hurt more people. I'm expressing myself, my anger, my frustration, my fears, whatever, by committing these acts of violence. So, whereas before we would negotiate and try and control, in this situation, we're trying to prevent more killings. And that's an entirely new mindset. I say new, this isn't new in the grand scheme of things. We've learned from Columbine in the 90s to change our tactics and adapt. And we're still doing that. For instance, the Pulse nightclub San Bernardino, California. How many of you remember that shooting? What do you remember about it?
They were receiving a lot of packages from Amazon and creating an armory in their homes. And they went to a Christmas party, I think.
So you said they. Who were the shooters?
I think it was a man and a woman. And wife.
Yeah, it was a husband and wife, so that's unique. Instead of one, it was two in male and female, which is also very unique. All right.
Controversy over the phones also, because they were using iPhones.
Yeah, and locking the phones, and we've run into that. Same thing with the Pulse nightclub shooter. That was another similar. But coming back around, here's something you may or may not be familiar with. Just to set the stage, San Bernardino, for those who are unfamiliar, you had two individuals who, married couple, they did self-radicalize. They were members of the agency that was hosting the Christmas party. They left the party, dressed in all black, came back to the party with weapons, and then started shooting it up there in what was considered a community center as part of this larger campus. After they engaged, they left. And there was a time period where we didn't track them. We couldn't figure out where they went. And then they suddenly were in a black Suburban or SUV, and then they ended their reign of terror in said vehicle. What we found out later is they had explosive devices that were staged, and they were driving around trying to detonate them. Because what were the first responders doing? They were converging onto the community center where all the bad things were happening. That's something that now we're starting to see and adapt tactics to respond to. But coming back around, we're still looking at majority of these events, one individual, multiple arms, typically it's male. So when we start looking at some of these, El Paso, Texas, this was the Walmart. Some of you may be familiar. Walmart has been taking a big hit. I mean, there's probably half a dozen incidents that are in or around a Walmart, here in the last 10 years. Although, between Walmart and Dollar General, I don't think there's a community that exists that doesn't have one, if not both. But what we had, male shooter, law enforcement arrives with less than 10 minutes, 22 dead, 24 injured, shooter was arrested. So you look at that and you're like, how can somebody create such havoc in such a short period of time? Well, how many of you have been to a Walmart on a typical afternoon? So, is that, and again, you look at 2019, pre-COVID, so that's when it was 100% everybody la-di-da-di going, not a care in the world. Heavily populated. So when we look at these events, if you think about a Walmart, something bad were to happen in the store, first and foremost, do you think you yourself could recognize what a gunshot sounds like? Some of you? All right. What do you notice about this room as I'm speaking as far as the noise? It echoes. In places like that, malls, shopping centers, there's a lot of reflective spaces. We talk about reflective, not just light, but noise. What tends to happen is, one, auditory exclusion, two, psychological mindset. If I suddenly dropped a gorilla in this room, is that something you would expect to see? No, it is out of context. And one of the things we found interviewing victims of these mass events is they justified what that sound was. It was not a gunshot, because gunshots don't exist in my reality. Or I've just never heard one. That's not what the movies sound like.
So I was at the Nationals game that had the gunfire at the Nationals game last year. And I was not far from where the guns went off, but it was outside the stadium. But in no way did I think it was a gunshot. I thought something had fallen, like a chair or something. The first, because like you said, it echoes, and you can't find the direction of where that sound came from. Completely out of context until people start running around, and then information starts spreading, like you said. Then it becomes this every man for himself type thing.
So, and that leads me into this little video clip. So some of you may or may not be familiar. This was an event that happened in France, very similar in some aspects to the shooting outside of the sporting event here in DMV. You had Charlie Hebdo was a French newspaper that had published a caricature of the Prophet Muhammad, and it was not well received. And ended up, some radicalized individuals went to the office and actually shot up the place in the neighborhood with AK-47s. That was a few months before this event. And the reason why I preface that is that you would assume there's probably a heightened sense of security. If just a few months ago people are running around with AK-47s shooting anybody, we should probably be a little bit more prepared for something else happening. So, a few months later, we had this event in, somebody take my clicker thingy? There it is. It's black because it's tactical. So what we've got here is some CCTV footage from a cafe. And the reason why I show this is I want you to notice human reactions. All right, and then we're going to talk through it.
Surveillance video shocking the world. The very first moments of the terrorist attacks in Paris. Glass flies everywhere. Panicked patrons dive under tables and run for cover. This as the merciless terrorist sprays the restaurant with bullets. You can see the terrorist through the window as he stalks his victims in the video obtained exclusively by the DailyMail.com. Les Trent is at the restaurant in Paris.
One of the security cameras was pointed towards the outside, and then this haunting image. You see a gunman train his weapon on someone on the ground right here. What the surveillance camera shows next is truly remarkable.
The terrorist stands over a defenseless woman, pointing his AK-47 at her head, but the gun appears to jam. Then he walks away, and we discover that there were actually 2 women there, and they run for their lives. Now watch another terrified woman who dives under the restaurant bar, where the bartender comforts her in her arms. The bartender then peers over the bar to see if it's safe to come out, and the woman runs for the basement. Others soon follow suit and head into the basement for sanctuary. Cops identify the terrorist in the surveillance video as Salah Abdeslam, the attacker who is still at large.
So, what did you notice as far as human reaction? This is, for those who are unfamiliar, AK-47 is the most prolific weapon system in the world. There are over 200 countries that produce it, and there are hundreds upon thousands of versions of it that exist. Also, it is probably one of the most dependable firearms in existence. Now, accurate? But dependable, yes. I mean, I've seen them where it's a shovel handle had been attached to the back end to make a stock, and they're still running and gunning with it. All right, now they're not going to hit anything, you know, further than 50 feet away, but it runs. So the likelihood of that happening, that was an act of God, yeah, you know, for something like that to happen. But when you saw people move, what did you notice? Some just dropped to the ground, right? Anybody notice anything different?
One woman who ran just...
Yeah, some people took off.
But she stood up.
Yes, yeah. So you saw various reactions to this act of violence. Also an AK, it's a rifle round. It is a very loud and distinct crack. When you start doing multiple rounds, which this individual was, even if you had no idea of gunfire, but you've attended some movie or television show in which gunfire was at play, you could probably put 2 and 2 together. I bring this up because you had some folks, the reaction was just to drop. The 2 women, those were plastic tables, like your patio furniture. That's not going to stop anything, let alone a rifle round. But that was just their instinct. At any point in time watching that video, do you think anyone in there had in the back of their mind, man, if something bad happens, I'm going to do something. I'm going to go somewhere? No. No, and that's typically what we'll see. If you don't have a plan, you get overwhelmed and you shut down. Here's another video. For those who don't know, the Westgate Mall incident lasted 2 days. What ended up happening is you had a small group of extremists took over one of the major malls in Nairobi. And I was telling some people earlier this morning, one of my favorite coffee shops is actually on the front side of that mall. It's large, it's all marble, you know, it's a very nice modern facility. During this event, there was a children's cook-off happening in the parking garage. The mall was well populated, it was very busy at this time of day. But you had less than a dozen individuals control the mall for several days. One of the side notes is that you had the military and law enforcement butting heads. Here in the domestic United States, if a terrorist incident occurs, an active shooter incident occurs, law enforcement is going to respond. Other parts of the world, it's going to be a fight between the military and law enforcement, and that's what happened there in Nairobi. So there's no audio for the video. I just want you to notice human reactions. You can start to see some people turn to a sound, and then they start running away. But then you'll notice there are still some folks who aren't really sure why everyone's running. And they just kind of meander around. That guy, you know, with his checkered sweater vest, well, if I wore that, I'd be confident too. Now, at this point in time, he's not injured. It's not as if he got hit and went down. In that circumstance, the weapon did not fail. And then from here, you can see the terrorists are starting to gather those who have remained within the mall. What's unique is there's a gentleman who may or may not be associated with another foreign government who looks a little different than the rest of the crowd and actually produces a sidearm and starts guiding people. That's the coffee shop that I was referencing earlier. So if I see everybody running in one direction, why is there, and that's the individual I was spoken about, who appears to have some level of training. In that part of the world, you've got several different government organizations that are there in support. And several of the malls and shopping centers actually employ independent armed officers. So I bring that up, again, to show human reactions. All right, the person who decided that they were just going to drop to the ground and hide did not end well. One of the things we saw at the Pulse nightclub shooting and the after actions on that is that people are used to coming in one door and that's all they remember. And so when bad things happen, they try and leave through that same door. I know I'm dating myself, but several years back, there was a hair band that was performing up in New England. I believe it was Great White is the name of the group. And they had pyrotechnics that were on display that actually caught the ceiling on fire and burned the nightclub down. A lot of people died in that, being trampled, because everyone ran to the same door. Even though there were multiple exits, but everyone had programmed themselves like, well, this is the door I came in, that's the door I leave. When we start looking at people running from the threat, what tends to happen is, unbeknownst to them, they're programmed to go, well, that's the door I came in, so that's the way out, even though I can see other doors. But I never gave it a thought. I never thought about, well, if something bad happened, and it doesn't have to be an armed intruder. It could be a fire, it could just be an alarm, whatever. I could go out that door, that door, that door. When we talk about other incidents, what was unique about this? Virginia Beach Municipal Center, 2019. He actually used a suppressor. There's that. What about the shooter? Yeah, had access. One of the challenges that was brought up, and I believe is still in court, is one or two of the employees had their concealed carry permit, but they were not allowed to be armed on the premises, and that was something that had been brought up. Now, what I find interesting on a personal level is that this person, as far as their employer was concerned, was not disgruntled, was not at risk of being fired, just came in and committed these acts of violence. Now, without knowing anyone personally involved, you could say as the employer, I was like, no, I had no idea. I had no idea. And then you talk to other coworkers and they're like, yeah, that dude was pissed off all the time. You know, he always talked about coming in here and doing this.
I was there a week later, and they had a big memorial set up outside with a counselor and a dog for comfort for people that...
And that's one of the things I've started working with businesses where I live at, is the aftermath, and helping them go through and continuity of operations or co-op. You know, how do we get things back to normal? And one of those aspects is counseling for the employees and recognizing that some won't come back. And then how do we adjust for that loss of employees? And what's that going to do to our production, things like that? But you bring up a very good point. So, Matt, you've talked about all these horrific things, and you really bummed the hell out of me. what is it that I can actually do? Well, that's a great question. Some of you might be familiar with this. For those who aren't, Department of Homeland Security came up with this several years back, and it's more or less become kind of the MO for response, whether you work in an office complex, business, industry, even for school responses. Now, I warn you already that there's certain over-dramatic aspects of it.
It may feel like just another day at the office.
I want this guy to narrate my life,
occasionally,
though.
life feels more like an action movie than reality. The authorities are working hard to protect you and to protect our public spaces. But sometimes bad people do bad things. Their motivations are different. The warning signs may vary, but the devastating effects are the same. And unfortunately, you need to be prepared for the worst. If you were ever to find yourself in the middle of an active shooter event, your survival may depend on whether or not you have a plan. The plan doesn't have to be complicated. There are 3 things you could do that make a difference: run, hide, fight. First and foremost, if you can get out, do. Always try and escape or evacuate, even when others insist on staying. Encourage others to leave with you, but don't let them slow you down with indecision. Remember what's important, you, not your stuff. Leave your belongings behind and try to find a way to get out safely. Trying to get yourself out of harm's way needs to be your #1 priority. Once you are out of the line of fire, try to prevent others from walking into the danger zone and call 911. If you can't get out safely, you need to find a place to hide. Act quickly and quietly. Try to secure your hiding place the best you can. Turn out lights, and if possible, remember to lock doors. Silence your ringer and vibration mode on your cell phone. And if you can't find a safe room or closet, try to conceal yourself behind large objects that may protect you. Do your best to remain quiet and calm. As a last resort, if your life is at risk, whether you are alone or working together as a group, fight. Act with aggression. Improvise weapons. Disarm him. And commit to taking the shooter down, no matter what. Try to be aware of your environment. Always have an exit plan. Know that in an incident like this, victims are generally chosen randomly. The event is unpredictable and may evolve quickly. The first responders on the scene are not there to evacuate or tend to the injured. They are well trained and are there to stop the shooter. Your actions can make a difference for your safety and survival. Be aware and be prepared. And if you find yourself facing an active shooter, there are 3 key things you need to remember to survive. Run, hide, fight.
All right, so yeah, pretty dramatic. Although I think Susan from accounting was going to get everybody killed in the break room there, but having a plan is going to be something you're going to hear me go over and over and over again. That's a key aspect in just our daily lives. When we, as an individual, you know, it's great if the organization I work for or the place I go to school, if it has a plan, trained in a plan, great. But what if I'm outside of that environment? You know, my day-to-day living, if I'm out with my family, have you talked through things of that nature? How about paying attention to your surroundings, knowing where exits are? One of the games, you know, I would play with my kids is when we would be in a waiting room or at a restaurant, I'd ask questions like, how many people are in the room? And how many exits? Now, you sit there and go, that's a sucky game to play with your kids. Why would you even call that a game? Or you're paranoid to the umpteenth level. When I ask them these questions, what did I just force them to do? Yeah, and so instead of doing this, right, beep, boop, beep, boop, beep, boop, 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 and oblivious to anything going around them, I force them to kind of get into the habit of looking around and paying attention. Typically, when we discuss bad actors, there are 2 people in any room that pay attention. There are the good people who are trained to do that, and then there are the bad people with the bad intentions. Everybody else is in their own world, right? You know, you could go to any public venue today, and you're going to find that majority of the people, it could be a restaurant, and they're sitting across from each other, not even making eye contact because they're buried into their phone. And so when bad things happen, they went from playing whatever version of Candy Crush is popular right now to now all of a sudden the world's coming to an end. And it's very difficult to change gears. Whereas if you could start to see somebody's behavior and go, okay, well, why did this person come in, stand on the opposite side of the door, and then just mean mug everybody in the restaurant? What is that intent? Maybe they're just upset, right? You know, they got to go to Aunt Susan's birthday party and they're pissed off, right? It's kind of a B. Point is, you're aware of what that potential is, and if it's nothing, so be it. You go about your daily life. But if it is something, you're already halfway through that first step. Knowing where our options are, who's out of place, all of these things are crucial to our own survivability. Knowing where safe places are, if I can't get out, let's say in that restaurant scenario, if there's only that entrance, where is an area inside of the restaurant that I might be able to go to at least secure a room? Bathrooms, right? They're designed to be able to be locked, you know, for that privacy. It could be, you know, if there's a kitchen space in the back, things of that sort. It could be another exit there off the kitchen because of fire code, you know, is mandated. Fighting is that last option. You know, it's great if we had that firearm. One of the challenges I always pose to people is that, you know, okay, hey, I'm going to carry, you know, my granddaddy's 1911 because, you know, 9mm might expand, but 45s don't shrink. And that's cool, right? You've got an 8-shot cannon strapped to your hip, but you've never fired it in a confined space where there are non-threats moving about randomly. And the fact that that 45 will not only penetrate bad guy X, but whoever's behind bad guy X and behind them and so on and so forth. And if you haven't trained to that, you don't want your first moment in time putting that theory into play to be the real world. All right, that's when bad things happen. Pre-planning is probably going to be that big key. All right, I always like to quote the famous orator Mike Tyson. Right, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And to that I say, you know, I've had unique experiences in life, traveling different parts of the world. And anywhere I went, there was always a plan. And that plan never happened the way it was supposed to. Domestically, you know, I've been on different high-risk warrants, going after bad people in bad places. And we always had a plan, and very rarely did it follow the plan. Right? But the fact is that we sat through it and go, okay, well, if this happens, what are you going to do? What am I going to do? It's the process that made us successful, not the actual plan itself. We need to take some honest time and go, look, if I'm going to be out in public with my family, with my friends, if something bad happens, what could I actually do? If you have small children, you're not going to tell a 5-year-old, okay, hey, Junior, I want you to grab that fire extinguisher, right? And when the bald guy dressed in all black with a backpack comes through the door, you're going to bash him with it, right? And the 5-year-old's going to look at you, you know, 2 knuckles deep in the left nostril and just nod and smile. But the idea that we're going to be able to depend on them to do anything, no, that's unrealistic. So does that mean I'm going to carry them? They're going to be attached to me. If that's the case, what is it that I can actually do, right? How many of you have carried that 5-year-old on the hip, you know, and groceries on the other hip, you know, and you're like, now the phone's ringing and somebody's at the door and the dog just puked on the carpet. Like, you know, that's what life gives to you, is everything all at once. You need to have those conversations and go, okay, well, that's great, right? I've got Grandpappy's 1911 strapped to my hip. How reasonable is it for me to actually do anything with this? All right? If I've got the young kids, am I going to go after bad guy X? What's my responsibility as a citizen? So bad guy X comes in through, you know, Libby's restaurant front door, and I'm sitting there with my family, and I've got a sidearm. What's my responsibility? Because I'm carrying, am I required to engage the bad guy? Who am I responsible for? Yeah, here's the thing. I'm not going to stand up in front and tell you, right? That's a personal choice. You know, for me, it's my family, right? I've got to make sure they're safe, and then as a follow-on, you know, and I'm taking the whole law enforcement thing out of it. Right? I'm just Joe Citizen. I'm not off-duty cop. I'm just a person who has my concealed carry. I have a firearm. My priority is going to be my family. And then from that point, if that threat is going to create those issues, that might cause me to make different decisions. All right? But I throw these questions out there because too often folks will go, you know what? I'm going to get that license. I'm going to meet with Ryan and his crew, and we're going to go through the steps, and I purchased my sidearm, and I've got it, and I'm going to carry it. But I haven't really thought through what happens next. And that's a horrible position to be in the best of circumstances, let alone when you haven't thought through all of the follow-on actions. You know, what could happen? So I talked through, you know, kind of playing that what-if game is good with kids. I found one of the issues I had early on was the school's policy for what the kids were going to do. When my daughter was in elementary school, the elementary school is all one floor. And so what ended up happening is they're like, hey, if a bad guy with a gun's at the front door, everyone's going to lock inside of the room. The problem is, at that school, they were called pods. So you actually had 3 classrooms in an open space and really no way to secure the door from the hall. So they were going to they had curtains And I was like, let me explain how ballistics work. Point is, what I stress to my daughter is if you have an exit, you go out the exit. Go down the road to the next house, to the next block, whatever, knock on a door, or you call me, right? Because just like in the run, hide, fight video, what was the first choice? Run, get off the X, get away from the bad stuff. So that was something that I started working in the schools over time. They've kind of evolved their procedures accordingly. Hey, if you're next to an exterior door, take the class and go. But these are conversations that I had early on, and they're not easy conversations. But if I don't have them, what's going to happen when something bad occurs? I have no idea, right? Because we never discussed it, right? You're not going to just magically come up with solutions. That's a horrible plan in life, right? Improvisation is not a plan. That's when everything goes sideways and you got nothing left. Okay, now I'll improvise. All right, that's the person who's like, I don't need a tourniquet, I've got a belt. Now, I just spent $4,000 on my pistol, but I'm not going to spend $30 on a tourniquet. Because pistols are cool, tourniquets are lame. All right, point is, you need to have these ideas in place, start talking through it. It doesn't have to come across as the Chicken Little, like, oh my gosh, everyone's going to kill you, everyone's bad, right? Because we don't want to live in that world. It's just being aware. When you learned how to drive, did they tell you that every other person on the road is going to crash into you? No, because how scared would you then be behind the wheel? You'd be terrified. You'd suck as a driver, right? You'd go 5 miles an hour, you'd slam on the brake every 30 seconds, you'd fail your test. But how did we explain these other drivers to you? Hey, be aware. Be aware when you come up to the intersection, watch what the other cars are doing, all right? They might not stop. You need to be prepared for that. Use that same analogy. Just like when you teach a new driver to be aware of their surroundings, that's what we're doing. So we learn our environment. We learn where's the best position to be in. One of the worst things that can happen is when my brother, who's a SWAT commander, and I go to dinner together with our families. Because the wives and kids just stand around the table waiting until we pick our seats. And then the two of us are usually battling for the best position of the room. I like using the analogy, hunter in the woods. If you go to the mall sometime, you walk in through the door, walk into the store, take a moment and just observe the environment. I know I hate malls, and if I am forced to go to one, I want to go from here to there and back in as short amount of time as possible, right? Problem is, with the blinders on, I might miss things. So I force myself, I come into that door and I just take a moment and I look around, right? If everyone was running towards me, would that be a clue, right? Which means I'm going to go, what's going on over there? You know, just like in the videos. No, hopefully I turn around and get off of Dodge just like everybody else. Take those moments, kind of just be aware. You know, if you remember from Sesame Street, one of these things is not like the others. One of these things is doing their own thing. I had a singing career, went south. Well, how could we spot an armed subject? What do you think? Just off the top of your head, things that you might have experienced in life, movies, television, social media. How would you spot somebody who is armed?
If they're carrying a gun?
Yeah, it could be open carry, right? All right? That doesn't make him a bad person, but is it smart to just be aware of their presence? Because maybe if bad things do happen, they're help or they're not. Either one.
In addition to that, if they're border carrying, a lot of times they'll fidget with it.
Yeah, what tends to happen, people who are untrained, even those who are, they are always kind of adjusting. Yeah. Right? You know, it's shifted. I'm not sure. Does anybody see that? You know, they do things. It's almost like when you get out of the car and you're kind of checking keys, wallet. Right? Same thing. I'm checking to see where is my sidearm there. Is everything good?
When I fix my waist waistband. I put my hand right on my cell phone. Like when I step out of the car, I'll just kind of make sure it's snug, and I'll put my hand right on my phone, like I'm adjusting my phone.
Yeah, all of that is good. Looking at these two examples, what holster are they using? The Levi, right? Because here's the thing, folks, when we're talking about, let's say, the criminal element, it is very rare that you're going to have, oh, okay, hey, I've got a crossbreed holster, you know, it's got the lining, Sherpa, because I'm sensitive on the skin. You know, I want easy, smooth draw. No, it's, you know, I either stole or bought this, I've stuffed it in my pants, and I'm going to cap somebody, you know, in the next 20 minutes. Even when we start looking at these active shooter incidents, you have seen some folks who are kitted up, very similar to the run, hide, fight guy, right, with the backpack and the whole tactical gear. I mean, we saw cases outside of the federal building where it had body armor, you know, or the Batman premiere where it was like body armor and looked like, you know, somebody out of one of the movies. In fact, one of the initial officers thought he was a police officer. So we talked about those security feels, protective body movements. Even being out of active law enforcement, I still have a tendency to not put my hands on my hips because I'm used to, for years, wearing a duty belt. And so I tend to almost walk in said fashion like I don't know what to do with my arms now. You know, these are just kind of clues. They also tend to, if the gun's on this side, just like how we teach, you know, always have your gun away from the threat, the bad guys do the same thing because they know, well, you could grab this and take my power away, so as I'm approaching you, I'm hiding what it is that I have. So all of these things are good tells. Bulges. One of my favorites is going to Walmart. And again, I'm not to bash Sam Walton, you know, his amazing outreach program, but it is probably one of the most eclectic environments, and you'll see different levels of concealment. Like a skin tight, I can tell what your tattoo says on your chest, but then you have a holster, and to the point I can read the serial number through your tank top. All right, that is not concealed. You know, if anything, all you've done is explained exactly what it is that you have. So be aware of that. You know, fall and winter are awesome, right? Because I got coats and, you know, I can just, I could do a drop leg if I wanted to. Parka, yeah. But in the summertime, obviously, you're much more restricted. You know, but these are conscious choices that we make. Now, we've identified some ways to tell. Across the board, though, with these areas, what's the main area of the body that you would focus on? Waistline. All right. Now, I used to carry, you know, an ankle holster when I was on patrol on a regular basis, and there are tells for that. What tends to happen is that leg requires a little more effort, and just unconsciously, subconsciously, I tend to, you know, do a little pimp step, whatever. You know, it's just something to be aware of. But for the criminal element, for the most part, we're talking about the waistline. And I always tell the kids, my daughter in particular, I was like, watch people's waistlines, you know, and that's what you look for. Well, what's that bulge? Could just be, you know, the goofy dad cell phone with the pouch, or it could be something more. But if you're ignorant of it, surprises like that are not positive, all right, for a multitude of reasons. So we identify all those things. Well, what about, is there a duty to act? Well, one, what do you know about duty to act? Are you familiar with the term, the legal term? Who does it typically represent? Law enforcement, and who else? Medical providers, EMTs, paramedics, you know, things of that sort. What about as a citizen? So what do you notice with Warren versus District of Columbia? Read this very carefully for the last sentence. Specifically, such as police protection. So unless your agency that provides protection for you, so whatever county that we're in, or Maryland State Police, unless their internal doctrine states that you have to, under the course of your duties, intervene, the federal government doesn't support that. So serve and protect up until a point. So with that being said, you as Joe and Jane citizen, do you have a duty to act? No. No. In fact, if anything, there's a line of litigation against you acting and putting yourself in those situations. Why? Well, look at the images here to the right. All right, so let's say you're walking through the parking lot, right? Because you just left Walmart. Because why wouldn't you? And you're going to your vehicle and you see these two women struggling on the ground. You have a duty to act. You have, some of you might be like, Facebook. Snappy, tweet, whatever. What about the middle screen? The bottom screen? I mean, are any of those situations? So here's the thing I want to bring up. Because some people will look at it and go, well, Good Samaritan law. Good Samaritan law focuses on what? Rendering aid, but how do they define aid?
Do you have training and that reasonable training? Right?
So, but does it say anything in regards to firearms, self-defense? It's medical in particular. So, can it be used? There have been cases where it's been attempted, right? And it's a stretch, but nothing to define. Under Maryland law, this is the only thing that I've got right now specific to Good Samaritan law, something that may provide some level of coverage. Forced you to evaluate your clothing choices. Fall and winter are awesome, right? Because I got coats and, I could just, I could do a drop leg if I wanted to. Parka, yeah. But in the summertime, obviously, you're much more restricted. But these are conscious choices that we make. Now, we've identified some ways to tell. Across the board, though, with these areas, what's the main area of the body that you would focus on? Waistline. All right. Now, I used to carry, an ankle holster when I was on patrol on a regular basis. And there are tells for that. What tends to happen is that leg requires a little more effort, and just unconsciously, subconsciously, I tend to, do a little pimp step, whatever. It's just something to be aware of. But for the criminal element, for the most part, we're talking about the waistline. I always tell the kids, my daughter in particular, I was like, watch people's waistlines, and that's what you look for. Well, what's that bulge? Could just be, the goofy dad cell phone with the pouch, or it could be something more. But if you're ignorant of it, surprises like that are not positive, all right, for a multitude of reasons. So we identify all those things. Well, what about, is there a duty to act? Well, one, what do you know about duty to act? Are you familiar with the term, the legal term? Who does it typically represent? Law enforcement and who else? Medical providers, EMTs, paramedics, things of that sort. What about as a citizen? So what do you notice with Warren versus District of Columbia? Read this very carefully for the last sentence.
Means that the police officers and first responders don't have to do that.
Any individual.
Specifically, such as police protection. So unless your agency that provides protection for you, so whatever county that we're in, or Maryland State Police, unless their internal doctrine states that you have to, under the course of your duties, intervene, the federal government doesn't support that. So serve and protect up until a point. So with that being said, you as Joe and Jane citizen, do you have a duty to act? No. No. In fact, if anything, there's a line of litigation against you acting and putting yourself in those situations. Why? Well, look at the images here to the right. All right, so let's say you're walking through the parking lot, right? Because you just left Walmart. Because why wouldn't you? And you're going to your vehicle and you see these two women struggling on the ground. You have a duty to act. You have, some of you might be like, Facebook. Snappy, tweet, whatever. What about the middle screen? The bottom screen? I mean, are any of those situations? So here's the thing I want to bring up. Because some people will look at it and go, well, Good Samaritan law. Good Samaritan law focuses on what?
You decide to act.
Rendering aid,
Yeah.
but how do they define aid?
You have training and that reasonable training, I think, right?
So, but does it say anything in regards to firearms, self-defense? It's medical in particular. So, can it be used? There have been cases where it's been attempted, right? And it's a stretch, but nothing to define. Under Maryland law, this is the only thing that I've got right now specific to Good Samaritan law, something that may provide some level of coverage. But I want you to recognize assistance or medical care. So we bring this up because, again, we need to think about the what ifs if this happens and be aware. And just what is my responsibilities? I always fall back on the people I'm responsible for. That's where my responsibility lies. All right? Because, again, I want to remove the whole badge-toting sworn thing. The family members. Because I'll even look at it off-duty. Was traveling, this is a couple years back, coming through Pennsylvania on the turnpike. And I haven't been active law enforcement, full-time law enforcement, several years. Instead, I just am part-time reserve. My wife likes to point that out, especially when I drive. It's like, you're not a cop anymore. And I was like, technically I am. Technically I am. I have a badge. I have a gun. You know what I mean. So, long story short, we stop at the turnpike and we're sitting there in the corner booth. And 2 tables over, there's a woman just losing her shit, just throwing things, slamming the tray down, screaming. My wife goes, "Do you have your gun?" And I was like, "Yes, I do." Do you feel better now? The point is that they ended up, state police came in, subdued her. I was not intervening because as long as my family was protected, and again, she wasn't presenting as this physical threat. And I do know guys who will go, "I'm never off duty." "Ma'am, you need to calm down." Next thing you know, it's a lot of this, stumbling, and you brought a gun into the situation. So you've escalated things. So I bring this up because I want us all to recognize who we're responsible for and how far we're willing to go. All right, so we're going to shift gears a little bit because everything we covered is preparing and training, which is great. But what are some other aspects of training besides coming up with plans and being proficient with firearms, which are all good things? How about any kind of unarmed combat? Do you have any experience in being able to just use your hands? Are there places, situations you could find yourself where a firearm just isn't an option? For a variety of reasons. But something bad happens, does that mean, well, then I guess just let it happen, hope for the best, or do you have the ability to do something? How about preparing for things? Things like first aid training, having first aid supplies. Beyond, well, I'm going to use my belt or my shoelaces, I'm going to MacGyver it. Because that works all the time. We're going to go over some things like stop the bleed. The idea is bad things happen, yes. But we want the ability to empower ourselves, empower others, friends, family members. Because this is a community thing. It's not a solo and individual thing. All right, so if we start looking at things in that fashion, you know, that makes our family our team, you know, and everyone kind of has a responsibility in one way, shape, or form. So under a response aspect, we look at things, if bad things happen, what is it we're going to do? Evacuate, shelter, again, this is all run, hide, fight. Executing your plan, accountability. How many of you have children under the age of 12? All right, so typically, if I'd say we'll go down even under the age of 10, they're probably going to stick with, right? You know, bad situations, a 6-year-old isn't going to have the individuality to run off on their own. They're going to cling to us. You start getting into more mature, girls 10, boys 20, you know, but you get into that more maturity, you know, then it could be, hey, go. And then meet me, find somewhere, get on a phone, find a phone, have a phone, contact me, we'll meet up at another location. Anybody ever do Black Friday shopping or holiday shopping? If you lose sight of each other, where's your rally point? Yeah, meet me back in the car. Remember where we parked. If you can't find me, this is where you go, right? Usually it's the wife telling me that, because I lose them all the time. If law enforcement shows up, unfortunately, we've had situations where the good actor who is armed, engaged, and law enforcement shot and killed them. That happened in California here just recently. Because, again, what ends up happening when law enforcement shows up? Do they have all the information? No. And what little information they have is most likely wrong. They show up. All they see is people are hurt, people on the ground, person's got a gun. I'm going to react before they hurt somebody else. I don't know that they're holding the bad person at bay. I just see them holding a gun at someone. I think they're going to kill them, so I kill them first. So in that regards, we need to be aware that until we have the opportunity to explain what's happening, we've got to assume the worst. I mean, I deal with the problem, gun goes down, hands in the air, or holster, hands in the air, whatever. I want to present as close to a non-threat as possible. A lot of information, real fast in a hurry. Any questions on anything? Anything that was like slapping in your face is like, this is screwed up. Where did you come up with this craziness? And what's interesting, you know, I've been doing this for a number of years, and at one point there was a lot of backlash on doing active shooter drills. And I brought up, it was like, we do a fire drill every month. When was the last time we lost a life due to a fire? And that was in Chicago, a Catholic school in like 1908. You know, ever since they modernized fire suppression, and we do a fire drill in a school every month. Now, here's where I'm going to get on my soapbox as a trainer. I will tell you that some people do a great job on the law enforcement side, training others, and some people do a horrendous, practically criminal job of training others. Case in point, one, I won't name, a sheriff's department decided to host, or they were asked to host active shooter training at a convalescent home. So you've got older people, right? You know, retirement home, however you want to define it. And they were going to run a drill. It was for the staff. Thing is, the manager didn't tell the nursing staff it was a drill. And so you ended up having an individual who appeared to be armed, firing blanks, and you had these nurses panic, crying, calling home, I'm going to die, patients, the whole nine. That was probably so ineptly handled, it was criminal. But again, what ends up happening is you have somebody with good intentions and is not capable as a trainer. Just because I'm a cop doesn't mean I can teach you to shoot a gun. I know plenty, unfortunately, in law enforcement who fire their firearm once a year. And they score their 70, and then they go back on the road, because that's all that was required in Virginia. That doesn't mean that just because I carried a gun or carry a gun, I'm good at teaching others. To the same, just because I'm in law enforcement doesn't mean I'm good on security measures, specifically training. Training, it's a unique aspect. But with that, I would take a break. So if you want to run some laps around the parking lot, get some air, exercise, maybe a little PT, whatever. But yeah, let's take like 5-10 minutes, and then we're going to kick off with some first aid training. Okay, so those are the items we're going to be using here the rest of the morning. How many of you have received prior first aid training? Okay, so everybody. So we're done. I mean, that's, yeah. So here's the thing. Whatever level skill set that you possess, all we want to do is either re-emphasize the things that you already know, or maybe add to that skill set, or present it in a different fashion. All right? It's not a matter of, hey, this is better than what you know. It's just more or in addition to. Again, we're always trying to add tools to the toolbox. For those who are unfamiliar, where this came about, these 4 organizations, Committee on Trauma, American College of Emergency Physicians, National Association of Emergency Medical Technicians, and then the final Committee on Tactical Combat Casualty Care. The one on the far right as you face the screen, that is the military DOD aspect. The reason why I present these up here is because when we start talking about providing first aid, what's the probable big negative to providing first aid? Liability, yeah. Oh, I could be sued, I could be sued. You're exactly right. We are in a litigation-heavy society. There's nothing we can do about that. But if I was going to sue you, these are the 4 areas of expertise that I would draw a subject matter expert from, right? If these are the 4 organizations that I would reach out to, well, if they're the ones certifying you, then you're pretty covered, about as covered as you can be. All right? There is no 100% coverage. But that's why we put them up here. You already read that. We don't need to belabor that point. So with the Stop the Bleed training, the focus is recognizing life-threatening bleeds and providing immediate intervention, some level of appropriate care to solve the problem. With the right training, the idea is that you can help save lives. There are going to be images and video that I'm going to show. Based off the subject matter, it's offensive. When I say offensive, not like on a personal level, but there are graphic images because we're talking about trauma. We're talking about bleeding. I can't address one without the other. I could do everything with magic fingers and say, this is blood. And you'd be like, oh, I could totally handle blood. Blood's cool. And then you actually see the trauma and you're like, oh. So we want to at least talk through it and go, okay, if this is an area of sensitivity for you, there are some people that providing first aid training just isn't an option for them. It just isn't. You know, in my own family, I have folks who cannot handle the sight of blood. You know, it's just, if that happens, they got to walk away. If you see an image and it's disturbing and you're like, man, I don't feel good, I used to tell people, hey, just step out of the room and then come back in. Problem is, I was teaching a group of folks in another country and I made that statement. I was showing a little bit more graphic images. One person stood up, took a step, and then passed out, smacked their head on the table, and then I actually had a real patient. So now I just tell you, hey, if you see something, just kind of put your head down for a second. We'll just scroll through it, and it'll be done. I will also try and warn you ahead of time, hey, this image is going to be graphic. Just be prepared. Number 1 cause of preventable death after an injury is bleeding. So if that's the number 1 preventable cause of death, well, we should be able to do something. So the committee that came together, this was after the Newtown, Connecticut school shooting. It was called the Hartford Consensus. These folks came together and they were like, this horrific thing just happened at an elementary school. What could we do? And of course, everybody had their thoughts and processes and security this and that. At the end of the day, they were like, what is something that's non-invasive, right? That's not going to be a political hot button topic like arm all the teachers or don't ever send kids to school or whatever. So they came up with maybe there's some first aid skills that we could teach the layperson. And that's where it came about. So as far as being able to utilize the training, I want you to visualize yourself as the center of that image. That's the hand. Top of the screen at home. How many of you have young children? All right. Do kids do stupid things? You didn't have to answer that out loud, but I appreciate the enthusiasm. Give you a case in point. At the ripe old age of 12, I decided if I tied a bed sheet to my belt loops, I could leap off the porch and parachute gently down to the ground. As you might surmise, it did not happen that way, and I ruined one of my dad's prize rhododendrons and came away a little bit scarred from the experience. Point is, stupid things that could happen at the home could actually have horrific consequences. I still carry a scar with 30 stitches on a rusty playset that was in my backyard. Just splayed my arm open, and one parent, who remains nameless, did not handle blood well, and she just kind of wavered. The other panicked, threw me in a Buick, and then drove like a bat out of hell for about 20 minutes as I'm just through a kitchen towel. I survived it, but looking back, there are probably other things that could have been done. You know, school, and again, this doesn't have to be acts of violence. This could be accidents. You know, accidents happen. How many of you commute or drive on a regular basis? Some of us quite early in the morning. 2 occasions I remember being the first on scene of an accident like 5 in the morning. You know, thankfully there was no traumatic injury, although those are fun for me. It's me. But, you know, being first on scene, I had some supplies. If things required it, I was prepared. Could be, again, natural disasters, storms, anything of that sort. So, these are the things we're going to review. First and foremost, I want you to recognize your own safety. We'll talk about the ABCs of bleeding and what they are. And then from there, talking about how we're going to treat bleeding. So, safety is your priority. Before you render aid, make sure the scene is safe for you. Let's go back to the car accident scenario. What if the car struck a utility pole? And you run up there with your first aid kit and you're like, Matt just trained me, ba, ba, ba. And I grab a hold of the car, well, it's electrified. And now not only am I not rendering care, I've just become the second patient. So we want to make sure whatever caused the incident, the injury, is not still a threat to us. For those of you who work in high stress environments with mechanical, it might be, is this still a concern, right? Talking about the high levels of stress and torque. Is this still a concern to us? If I shut down the engine, is it no longer a concern? Now I'll render aid. Now I'll provide care. Because again, as great as it is to be a hero, if you're not actually saving the day and you're just doubling the patient outcome, you haven't solved any problems, right? You've just added to it. So once we determine, yeah, it is safe, then we'll start providing those levels of care. It's always good, bloodborne infections, to be wearing gloves. In today's COVID days, you probably have multiple masks and antibiotic and gloves and scrubs and whatever else. So once I determine that the area is safe, before I even start putting my hands on somebody, I want to call 911. Some of you might have learned ABCs, airway, breathing, circulation. For us, it's going to be alert, bleeding, compression. Why is alert or calling 911 one of the first things I do? Yeah, because here's the thing. I might have started rendering aid and I'm inside of the car and I'm patching things up and I'm doing great stuff. It's like out of a movie. 10 minutes have gone by and why hasn't anyone else shown up? Oh, yeah, because I didn't tell anybody what was going on and we're on the side of the road here in rural Maryland. So we want to start that process as soon as possible. Now, we've alerted, at this point we need to start identifying what these bleeds are that are concerned to us. So the first one, these are cartoons.
When bleeding occurs as a result of a severed vein, the deoxygenated blood flows out at a continuous flow.
So that's a venous bleed. The second, a little different.
With arterial bleeds, the severed artery releases bright red oxygen-rich blood. The blood pulses out of the severed artery under high pressure and is difficult to control.
So these are our two concerns. Is there a third type of bleeding? Well, that's more of a location.
Like if you have a crush injury or something like that, you have a slow, just sort of...
Yeah. So let me just clarify. Capillary. If you fell on the ground and scraped the palms of your hands, you had a capillary bleed. Did you die? No. It would be a weird conversation we'd be having if you did, all right? But again, it's self-healing. So we've got capillary, venous, and arterial. Those are the three types of bleeds that we can have. Now, locations could be external, internal, blah, blah, blah. To that end, capillary, you've survived, you moved on. If anything, it was a little bacitracin, kicking the pants, it's boo-boo kisses, and you were good to go. Here, that's going to require more. So a venous bleed, it's dark red in color. Any ideas why? Yeah, it's deoxygenated, right? It's carrying carbon dioxide, the waste products. It's still necessary for us because the circulatory system is a closed system. So we can't lose blood because we need it. Arterial bleeds, those are more significant. They talked about they're harder to control in their spurting because they're what? They're coming directly from where, do you think? Yeah, the heart. So here's the thing. These are some clues to identify a life-threatening bleed. If it's spurting out of the wound, right, that's significant. If it won't stop, although eventually all bleeding does stop, all right, but for at least in the immediate, it's not stopping. How about if they're laying and there's a pooling of blood? That's probably significant. What else? Clothing, especially in the wintertime, might not see a pooling of blood, but what will you see? Yeah, it's just saturated all inside of the clothing and the coats. What about they started the day with two hands? When you come up on scene, one of those is not like the others. So FBI would call that a clue. And then lastly is just the level of consciousness. The injury itself has led to some decrease in consciousness. So what we've got here, a pooling of blood on the right. On the left is an arterial bleed. Now here's what I want you to notice. It's spurting out, and then after a couple seconds, you should start to notice something about it. What's happening to the pressure? Because it's a closed system. Here's the thing I want you to think about. When you are hurt, are you scared? Think about it with your kids, right? You know, little Johnny, little Susie, they fall on the ground, they got a cut on their finger, they see their blood, they start crying, right? And when we're scared, what happens to our heart rate? And now I see more blood, and I get more scared. And you see how this is just a negative spiral. You're essentially working your way down the drain. So we need to do something, intervene. So if the wound is to an arm or a leg, these are probably the most preventable cause of death from injury. And it could be utilization of direct pressure, just holding something directly on the injury, and or a tourniquet application. If we're talking junctional areas, things around the neck, the shoulders, the hips, those areas we're not going to be able to put a tourniquet on, right? We talk about the neck, you know, that would be negative. Not going to place a tourniquet on the neck. Shoulders, the issue there is you just don't have the ability. Same thing with the hips. So instead, in these instances, we're going to be packing those injuries. And then the last area of the body we're going to address is the chest, the torso. Good news, bad news. The torso, what we call the box, or rather what I call the box, we is mouse in my pocket, but This area of the body, I want you to think of like as a box filled with air. We want to keep the air in and not allow more air coming in the wrong holes. These areas here typically don't bleed very heavily. You just don't have the same vessels towards the surface that you do in junctional areas or in appendages. So, with compression and stopping bleeding, first and foremost, we talk about ensuring our safety. We did the alert, 911, we found a life-threatening bleed. Do you have a trauma kit available? How many of you have a trauma kit in your vehicles? Okay, some do, some don't. So for the sake of argument, you don't have one. Sorry about your luck, you're gonna die. Give me your toys. Who's your next of kin? Well, is there anything that I could do? Well, it just so happens I've got some cloth inside. Might be I was on my way from the gym, right? Or hopefully for you, I'm on my way to the gym and it's clean. So I come across and I find that individual and I'm going to take that cloth material. How many of you remember hand positions for CPR? All right, when you're doing your compressions, how are you holding your hands? Yeah, one over top of the other. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take that material and I found the injury and I'm just going to apply it and I'm going to apply direct pressure. Unlike the CPR where I'm pumping up and down, it's just nice steady pressure directly onto the wound. The idea is it's the most effective in the shortest amount of time. I see it, I grab something, I place direct pressure over it. I'm going to hold that pressure until when? Yeah, hopefully, you know, somebody else shows up, okay? Do you think I want to check to make sure it worked? No. Have you ever picked at a scab? What typically happens? Yeah, it starts bleeding again. So the minute you start lifting that up, you've done just that. So, and here our example, we've got somebody from CVS Pharmacy was walking on their way to work, or a butcher, because they're the only two people I know of that wear white coats in their day-to-day lives. They show up and they see, oh man, somebody was riding their bike and they fell off and they got a pretty good gash on the leg. They don't have a first aid kit, so they take that clean cloth material and they're going to apply it directly onto the wound, pushing down as hard as they can, holding it until some other person shows up who might have first aid supplies, a high level of training, and provide assistance. Now, that's when you have nothing in your car, in your vehicle right now. For those who don't have the cool first aid kits, do you have anything in there that might be utilized? All right. If you don't, how about on your person? Yeah, that we've got something on there. You know, I might take that sock off that I've been wearing all day. You know, you won't mind. You're unconscious anyway. All right. So again, improvisation is okay when, for whatever reason, you've been caught totally unprepared. All right, but that's not the ideal. Instead, we go back and we're like, do you have a trauma kit? Well, yes, I do, kind sir. Well, where is the wound located at? If it's an arm or a leg, is the tourniquet available? Well, you know what? I just so happen to have a really good first aid kit, so I do. So at that point, I would find the injury on the appendage. I'm going to place the tourniquet above the wound. Now, when we talk about above, this is where some areas of confusion occur. Because right now, as I stand, if the injury was here and I said above, okay, reasonable expectation, here. What if I'm laying flat on my back? Where's the above? You're like, oh, well, that's really complicated, and I never gave it that thought. Always think of, this is the pump. I want to place the dam, if you will, between the pump and the hole, right? So if here's the hole and here's the pump, I'm going to place it in between those two, so probably somewhere up here. As long as it is not on the wound or on a joint, and we'll talk through why that's imperative. The tourniquet is designed to stop the flow of blood. If it's done correctly, it'll accomplish said task. But here's the thing, you might find yourself physically incapable of shutting it off 100%. Have you failed? No. How many of you live in a structure with a faucet? I'm hoping that's everybody. Otherwise, I've really made it uncomfortable for someone. Point is that if you left the house this morning and that faucet was 100% on, that would suck, right? The water bill, you'd be paying out the wazoo. But let's say somebody showed up and they were able to shut it off about 80%. Has that improved your situation? Yeah, it hasn't solved it, hasn't shut it off. You're still paying, but it's much better than 100%. So with the tourniquet application, in this circumstance, we're going to place it directly over the clothing, but you are going to check to make sure there's nothing in the clothing that could be an impediment to the tourniquet. We're going to place it 2 to 3 inches above the wound, not on a knee or an elbow. Why wouldn't I place the tourniquet on a joint? What do you notice with joints? Yeah, there's a lot of movements, right? There's a lot of gaps. You start talking about like in a knuckle joint, such as an elbow. You know, there's a lot of spaces there. We're going to check pockets. If the tourniquet was to a leg, how many of you right now in your pockets have pocket knives and keys and pens and so on and so forth? All right, I've got this fancy shirt that has pockets up here for pens. You'd want to check those areas as well, because I don't want to place a tourniquet on and possibly cause more damage. Yes, sir?
The new ones in the last class I did, we were also told to check for is like the Dexcom.
Okay, yeah, so that's a good point for the diabetics. So, yeah, you've got those, and I'm trying to think if there's a birth control. I think norepinephrine is another one that actually...
That's sub-Q.
Well, that's true, too. So you would check those areas. So if you were looking for possible impediments and you felt that, that would be a clue. And all that we're talking about is you would come up higher. Benefit to us is those items are usually in the back of the tricep area and not high up on the arm. So you could get away with coming as high without being on the shoulder. That would solve that problem. Tighten it until the bleeding stops. Now, these are some options. Some of you had an opportunity to come up on the table and take a look. The one we're going to be focusing on is the one to the far left, which is the combat application tourniquet. These others are all recognized by the military as being viable tourniquets, meaning they've been tested, tried out, and they said, yes, the efficiency of these is substantial enough that we would put them into practice. Again, for me, it's the CAT. One of the things it would be wise, if you had the time and interest, is find out local fire and rescue, what tourniquet do they carry? Because the benefit is if they carry the CAT, they're going to recognize what it is for what it is and not cut it off. In Frederick County, Virginia, where I live, we had trained fire and rescue in utilization of the CAT tourniquets, but unfortunately, no one had the presence of mind to train the hospital staff. So what ended up happening, horrific car accident, it was a partial amputation of a leg, tourniquet was put on place, stopped the bleeding, awesome. They get into the emergency department, a young resident's in there and it's like, what the hell is that? Cut it off. And the paramedic's like, you don't want to do that. You don't tell me what to do. MD here, what's it say on your shirt? Yeah. Goes to cut it off, and what happens? Scoot, scoot, scoot. Yes, and then the trauma surgeon, who is retired military, comes in and is like, what the F did you just do? And the resident's like, Point is, if it's the same device that your fire and rescue utilize, they're not going to be surprised by it, and it'll create a much smoother transition to a higher level of care. All right? Just a side note, nothing, again, that you have to do. So take a look at what you've got there in front of you. Does anyone not have a CAT there with them? Should have one per person, because you're going to be doing individual work with the CAT tourniquets. Anybody missing? Good. There we go. All right, so kind of work along up on the screen there with the CAT. A couple things as far as the parts. First and foremost, I can hear by the distinct sound of Velcro that you found the self-adhering band. So that is where the majority of the work is taking place. That is the wide Velcro strap that will go around the appendage. Now, from there, you've got a buckle, the rod, the stick, if you will. That is the windlass. That's where your mechanical leverage comes from. Then on the windlass, you have the clip, because this is what you're going to turn. Think about that faucet analogy. If I'm turning the faucet off, it doesn't matter which direction you go. Once you've tightened it up and you shut off the blood flow, you'll take the handle and tuck it into the clip. That's going to prevent it from unwinding. Now, to make sure it stays in there, you're going to take this piece of white tape, fold it over top, and now it's locked into place. What do you notice is written on the white piece of tape? Time. So what do you think you want to write on there? Yeah, the time you applied it. Now, the goal is to give higher level of care an idea of how long it's been in place. So if you were to write 10:10, that would be pretty good. If you wrote 10 o'clock, that's okay. Just don't write Saturday. Give them some frame of reference so they know, okay, it's been in place for approximately 30 minutes. So this is the protocol we're going to follow. Or it's been in place for an hour. Now, to that end, some of you might have heard stories about tourniquets, and particularly that if you place a tourniquet on the appendage, the person loses the arm. That's what I was taught in the early 90s coming through EMT school. They're like, this is the last resort. If you put a tourniquet on, great job, you've lost the arm. The thing is, none of that was based off science. It was so-and-so taught so-and-so who then repeated it over and over again. We've had cases, particularly with the war on terrorism overseas, where tourniquets been in place for 6 hours. You live in the United States, even in a remote environment, you're going to get them to a higher level of care, with exception. Now, if you were teleskiing, up in the, wherever mountains, or you were in God's country, with no cell service, yes, maybe you would push the limits of said time frame. But for anyone who was just commuting to the Walmart or work, you're going to get them to a higher level of care well within that time frame. So, I'm going to show you a video. This is body cam footage of a deputy sheriff. Give you some backstory. The individual, they were in a vehicle pursuit, bailed out of the car. When the deputies pursued him on foot, he turned and started shooting at them. They engaged in a firefight. The individual was struck in the leg and went down. And then once the deputies determined he was unarmed, they rendered aid. But I want you to see this just to see how effective the training was. No. So, well, here's the thing. The first one, all he had is it had flipped over. All he needed to do was just turn it. But what ends up happening under stress? You're like, shit, this isn't how it's supposed to be. So, okay, it added like all of 10 seconds. Not a big deal. That was a femoral bleed. So if you're talking about substantial bleeds, femoral artery, right, it runs on the inside of the thighs. It bifurcates down to the inside of the thighs. An average adult could bleed out in 3 minutes. All right, so that's pretty significant, but they've got to get in there quick. And thankfully, he did save the individual's life. He was medically treated and then appeared in court and whatever happened there. But I wanted to show that because, again, how did my training work? for the most part, I would say the training did work, right? They recognized the need for it, they applied it. It just, hey, stress does what stress does, tends to make us second guess. He came back and fixed it and still was able to solve the problem. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take our time and we're going to practice self-application, right? Why would I have you practice putting the tourniquet on yourself first? Yeah, because who's the worst patient in the room? You are, right? Because if my arm is hurt and not functioning, now how many arms do I have to use? One. And I'm in pain and I'm losing blood, and if I suck at doing this, I'm just going to continue to lose blood, which is going to make me less effective. So, point being, it's crucial that we're able to apply it to ourselves. So here's what we're going to do. First and foremost, your Uncle Matt's going to show you how to stage a tourniquet properly. All right? You want to have, if the cat is the tourniquet of choice, you'll notice that the ones you have say training on them. All right? This is not one that I would use in the field. The cats, by their own explanation, say, if you practice, don't use it in the real world. Because what happens with practice, it causes wear points and it could fail. So, if you're going to carry one, they typically come vacuum sealed in plastic. Now, the video you saw, what was that red stuff that was over everything? All right, and blood is pretty grippy. Yeah, it's just, yeah, slickery, you know, slippery, whatever. One of the things we would recreate before all the fake blood really became prevalent in the military was buttermilk. I would warm buttermilk and I'd throw that over everybody, and of course they were always pissed off at me because they're like, we stink like spoiled milk now. But you know, it's learning. So what it caused people to do is recognize, man, it's hard to grip this. So if you're going to carry a tourniquet on your person, take it out of that plastic. You know, have it, for me, I always use just rubber bands. That keeps everything together. What you'll notice is the tail I fold, and that prevents it from accidentally coming apart. Because here's the thing, I'm right-handed, so of course this arm is the one that's going to go out. And now I've got to figure out a way to get this. Oh, and by the way, I've just been shot, and it hurts, and I'm bleeding. And now I'm trying to figure out a way to feed all this through. Whereas if you have that folded, it helps prevent that from accidentally happening. Also, if you decide whether it's a winter or for its own PPE, you're wearing gloves, this gives you a little bit more to grab a hold of. All right? So from that point, all I do is fold the tourniquet. Do not lock the windlass in. It seems like a good idea. The problem is if you only have one hand and you've got to apply it and then undo this, it's just one more step to the process. So I have that open. All right, so here we go. I'm going to grab it. Now, I'm going to make it easy for you. If you're right-handed, I want you to put the tourniquet in your right hand. If you're left-handed, place the tourniquet in your left hand. Whatever arm is injured, you can't move, right? So I don't want to see one of these numbers. Oh, this isn't hard at all. All right, you're not putting on a shirt. So I've got that loop. Now, just watch me before you start doing stuff. I'm going to slide it up. I get it as high up on my arm without being on the shoulder. Now, what do you notice about the strap? Which direction am I pulling? Towards me, right? Across the body. This is key. Some of you are going to place it on backwards, and you're going to try and make it work. Here's the problem. You're pulling across your body, you just don't have arms long enough to do that. In fact, some of you are built like T-Rexes. There is no way you're going to effectively tighten this up. So if you put it on backwards, what am I going to tell you to do? Take it off, just like the deputy did, fix it, right? Set yourself up for success. Now watch, I pull it across my body. Here's where people fail, is they don't do this step tightly. Now, I did it tight, and I haven't even twisted the windlass, and you're going to start to see Yep. You're going to see veins distended. You're going to start to see a collection of fluid there in the lower part of my arm. So right there, we've got a certain level of occlusion occurring. So now all I have to do is just like 1 or 2 twists, and I've shut it off. At that point, lock it in place. Why is this imperative? Well, because you start moving somebody, and this gets hit, it's preventing it from unwinding. Whereas if you forgot to do that, Murphy's Law comes into play, and now all that hard work just got lost. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take you through it step by step. So set up your tourniquet for your own success. You got it folded over. If you're right-handed, it's in your right hand. If you're left-handed, it's in your left hand. And go. Going to go ahead and open it up. Slide it up the arm, nice and high without being on the shoulder. Grab the tail. Pull it across your body. All right, you want it nice and snug, and then lock it, Velcro to Velcro. All right, you should start to feel it pretty snug across your arm. Take a look and see which way you're pulling. There you go, you got it. So here's the thing, look up here for a second. Don't be afraid to kind of ratchet out and across, because what can happen if the buckle's real close to you, there's nowhere to snug it. So what I'll do is I'll go away and then across.
Plus that push is heavy if you're over material pushing.
Yeah, so if you push away, there you go, and then snug it up. There you go, and then just lock it Velcro to Velcro. So it'll go under your arm. Yep, all right. And then just give it 1 twist. We don't want to create any kind of vascular occlusion. And then lock it into place. So that's all I want is just that little bit of tightness. We're not actually looking to shut off your blood supply. Some of you should probably ask if you're on clotting meds. All right, and once you've got it on, just again, 1 twist, go ahead and take it off. All right, and then set it up again. So now what I'm going to do is put you onto the clock. The goal is to get it in place just 1 finger tight, meaning I'm going to walk around, and as long as I can't push it down your arm, right? Because again, I don't want you to actually have full occlusion. Not that you honestly will put yourself into a cardiac emergency, but anything's possible. Just 1 twist, lock it into place. I'll come by and hit it, and as long as it doesn't move, you pass, take it off. But we want it to be sub 30 seconds. That's the goal. My accent sometimes. English is only my first language. So here we go. Fold your tourniquet up, set it up, ready to go. If you're right hand, it's in your right hand. Left hand, it's in your left hand, and go. Go, 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 go. Don't move that arm. That arm's damaged. You're already 10 seconds into this. Quick, quick, quick. 15, 15, 20. There we go. 25. Your 30-second mark. Oh. There we go. Good. Good. Keep working. Keep working. I think that's everybody. Good. Did you ever take it off?
Well,
Are you still working?
Screwed up when I pulled it on top.
All right.
Really fast.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Rotated in here, so the Velcro was turned the wrong way.
So just like the deputy. Yeah. All right. Go ahead. Take them off. Take them off. Set up again. Set up again. So here's the thing. You know, I already mentioned we're the worst patients. And so that's why we always look to put it on ourselves. The other thing is when you place it on yourself on one of your arms, I've taken away half your skill set, right? Your other arm. So if you can do it in under 30 seconds to yourself, placing it on somebody else is that much easier, all right? Which again, we'll do with the pool noodles. All right, so let's go ahead, let's set it up again. Let's see if we can beat that last time. Bop, 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 bop. If you're right-handed, right hand, left hand, left hand. What's everybody doing for lunch today? Going, go! Quick, 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 quick. 5 seconds. Go, 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 go. 10 seconds. Go, go, go. 15 seconds. Keep working. 20. 25. 30 seconds. Keep working, keep working, keep working. There you go. If I check you, you can go ahead and take it off. Good. To check you? There we go. All right. So, placing it on the arm. All right. For the most part, it's a very doable skill set, isn't it? Right? Did anyone feel smarter? No, I mean, it wasn't like, you've accomplished a degree. But again, it's a basic skill set that's something we can share with everybody. Now, what about legs? What are some issues? Longer? All right, so here's what we're going to do. Everybody stand up. Can I borrow you, sir? Actually, let me get somebody who doesn't have anything on their, I need a volunteer. Okay. Oh, you got snow pants on? Look at that.
Yeah, it's cold outside.
Cold outside. Well, you're going to lay on your back. Are you good with that?
Okay.
I should have mentioned that earlier.
I like being on my back.
Yeah, you're going to stay up here. Okay. So I'm going to have you just lay on your back for me, please. Okay, so come on around, please. Empty your left pocket for me. All right, so what did we talk about as before we place the tourniquet on? Because we're placing it over clothing. What is it we're checking for? Yeah, I want to make sure there's nothing here on his person. Now, when we were doing it to the arm, we kept the loop. If he's got a gunshot wound here to the lower part of his leg, am I going to be picking his foot up and sliding this over? No. So what is it I'm going to do? Yeah, I'm just going to open it up. All right. Now, if this was to myself, what's the good news?
You have 2 hands.
I have 2 hands. Thank you. So what I can do is if the person's laying on their back, right, if they're supine, you have a natural space underneath the knee. So what I can do without moving the leg around is I open the tourniquet up, right? How we had it staged was the worst case scenario, which is one of our arms is injured. So that's why it's set with that loop. Now that I know it's my leg, I'll open it up, slide it underneath, and at this point I can just kind of shimmy it up, right? And then I'll lock it into place. Now with the leg, does it matter which direction I pull? I could pull this way, or I could pull that way. Again, another benefit to being shot in the leg. Not that there are many, but you take them where you can. At this point, I can go ahead, twist, lock it into place, and I'm done. All right, that's with the leg. Key takeaway when applying it to the leg is making sure if they were to stand, it would be level with the floor. All right, where you run into challenges is if you get it up on the hip. All right, so think of it as boxers, not bikinis. All right, you know what I'm talking about. All right, so if we keep it in that regard, we'll know a good rule of thumb is it should go underneath the back pocket. All right, or if you're talking about anatomy, under the buttock. So placing it on somebody else, I'm going to come through in the same fashion, slide it underneath the knee. At this point, I'll come up as high as I can, tighten it down. Same principle, I want it to be as tight here as I can get it. And at that point, I'll go ahead, give me one good twist, lock it in place, and we're done. All right? I had already cheated by checking his pockets, but again, that's certainly something that we want to go ahead and confirm before we start doing the tourniquet application. All right? So here's what we're going to do. Thanks, sir.
Matt, maybe you cover it later, but are we evaluating for more serious injuries, other places or something?
Sure, yeah, we're going to get into other injuries that don't qualify for a tourniquet application. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a tourniquet self-application, but you're going to use your chairs so everyone doesn't have to, thank you to Tony for volunteering to get himself dusty. But instead of you placing it, because some of you might have familiar relationships and placing a tourniquet on a leg isn't an issue, others maybe not. So we're going to do self-application for the tourniquet for the leg, and you can do that seated in the chair. All right, so let's go ahead, let's have a seat. So go ahead, fold your tourniquet up. Here's the thing. You're going to hear me talk about train the way you fight or train the way you want to perform. So would I have a tourniquet staged for arms and a tourniquet staged for legs? No. If I got one tourniquet, it's going to be one way that it's staged. Worst case is the arm. So I know now, okay, it's staged for the arm, not a big deal. Pull it apart, slide it underneath, shimmy it up, lock it into place. So go ahead, you've got your tourniquet staged, just like we'd practice with the arms. Doesn't matter which hand you want it in, and go, 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 go. Don't slide it up the leg. Don't slide it up the leg. Watching you slide it up the leg, don't slide it up the leg. There you go. Open it up, shimmy it up. Try and get it up there high. Some of you are just above the knee. All right? How many of you checked your pockets before you put the tourniquet on? Oh, I'm not going to check you. I'm just like, yep, that looks good. We don't have that kind of relationship. So go ahead, you got it nice and snug. Once you feel it's pretty secure, go ahead and take it off. Now, here's the thing. Some of you, depending on where you were trained or what experiences you have, we used to teach putting a knee on the inguinal, the inside of the thigh. The challenge is, unless it's something you practice on a regular basis, people were typically doing it wrong, and it was just adding complications. So I've gone away from teaching placing a knee. Instead, I've just go and get the tourniquet on. All right, because what ended up happening is people were placing the knee in the wrong spot or actually creating more injury by placing the knee on the groin.
So the knee was to help stop the blood?
Yeah, so if you envision, again, if you don't mind looking at my crotch, it's a personal thing, I mean, whatever. So inside of the thigh, that's where your femoral arteries are. What we were teaching was essentially placing the knee. Think of it where your hip bends, where your pants crease. That's where I was placing the knee. Problem is, it's got to be at an angle. What was happening is people weren't doing the angle, and they were dropping a knee on somebody's private area, and it wasn't changing the situation in a positive way. It was just further complicating things. So we've gone away from that. And again, this is me as your instructor, because I see people making the mistake too often, and it was just adding time. So instead of trying to fix a problem, I just eliminated it altogether and go right to checking and applying the tourniquet. So, questions on the tourniquet applications, arms and legs. So a couple of key things I want to address, because being in the firearms industry for a number of years, I always run into this. Improvisation, like I mentioned before, is not a plan. It is the lack of a plan. Yes, there are situations in which we're forced to improvise, but we should never just assume that's how we solve the problem. To that end, I'll be out in a range and I'll see somebody spending $10,000 on kit, right? And they got optics and lights, and they look like SEAL Team 6 and, DevGru and all this cool guy stuff, or gal, whatever. And they show up and I go, hey, cool. I mean, looks way expensive. I bet you really shoot well because you spent money. Where's your first aid supplies? And they'll be like, oh no, I'll use my belt, and I've got some tampons. And I was like, they fit in bullet holes, and that's my go-to. I was like, that's a horrible idea, and here's the reason why. So, in case you're wondering, in regards to success on improvised tourniquets, if there's no windlass, so one of the things you might have seen are the giant rubber bands. The Rats has a moderate level of success. For those who aren't familiar, it's a metal, almost like a figure 8, and a shock cord. It's very similar setup to this, but the cord is thin, whereas this is wide. And you wrap it, and you can use the metal device as a form of a windlass. If you're improvising, what statistics have shown is that 100% fail if all you've done is just wrap cordage, because you don't have the mechanical leverage to compress. If you have an improvised windlass, it's got about a 30% fail rate. So you've got a 1 in 3 chance of it not working at all. Of those that are effective, over time, the effectiveness decreases exponentially, meaning 10 minutes, 10%, 10 minutes, 10%. Because here's the reality, your body is amazing and will compensate for a lot, meaning that if you had a traumatic injury, your vessels are elastic. They're going to draw within the body. They're going to attempt to close off. Blood is going to be shunted from the appendage to other areas. And about, let's say, 80%, the body has compensated for. You only had to cover 20%. But that's in the short term. I lost a lot of blood. I'm in shock. My 80% is going to start decreasing the longer it takes me to get to a higher level of care. So now my body's at 70%, which in an improvised tourniquet won't magically make up the difference. It's going to fail. And so that's why improvisation is not a good idea. Now, you could have a great cat tourniquet and you placed it, and then you come back around and you're like, they started bleeding again. Does that mean you screwed up? No, it just means, like I said, that the body might have hit that compensation and then it's starting to decompensate. So instead of you taking the tourniquet off or fixing it, if you had a second one, that's when you would apply it and make up that difference. All right? No amputation has been caused. We already addressed that. The big challenge people face is second guessing themselves. Man, that looks bad, but is that tourniquet bad? I don't know. If you want to err on the side of caution, put the tourniquet on.
Question.
Yes?
When I put the tourniquet on my leg, it ended up being like that at one point?
Yeah, don't do that. Yeah, exactly what you did. For those, if I could show, who can't see, it just bound up on the one side. You know, what you can do if you have the presence of mind is just simply pop it back and forth, or like the deputy did, take it off and, oh, okay, and then reapply it. Okay. It will, if it's bound up, just as a point of demonstration, if it is bound up, the tourniquet will still work. It's just located, instead of the force being dispersed along the buckle, it's just isolated to the corner. That's not going to cause it to fail. It'll still function. You'll just have to kind of work through it a little bit.
It was a little tougher to pull the...
Yes, yeah, it's not going to be smooth through the buckle. Yeah, and a lot of it is just going, okay, this is what's happening. It's not me. I've just got to adjust it a little bit.
It's not me, it's you.
Yeah, there you go. It's us.
It's not you, it's me.
It's us. So coming back around, if you're guessing, second guessing, better to apply it and not have needed it than to wait. Because as you're waiting, what's happening? They're just losing blood, right? And things are only going to get worse if they're losing more blood. We already talked about don't use the practice ones in real training, and repetitive training is important. Here's some harsh realities. Tourniquets hurt. If the person's conscious, they're going to complain more so. Well, I shouldn't blanket statement. I've had patients say that the tourniquet hurt worse than the injury. Now, that's not everybody. It's just one of my experiences that really, is prevalent in my mind. So be prepared for that, because here's the thing. You're compressing tissue, which means nerves, muscles, tendons, vessels. It hurts to compress, but you've got to push through all of that to find those vessels, and the vessel has to be compressed against something solid, which is what? Bone. So depending on how thick your sandwich is, right? Because I got a pretty thick, don't look too hard. I got a pretty thick sandwich there, and I got a lot to compress to be able to get that vessel clamped off. All right? So just because they start telling, this hurts, this hurts, this hurts. You know, that's when you do the parent card. It's like, this is for your own good. Hemo and static is essentially just blood stopper or blood slower. Things like combat gauze, C-locks. There are a bunch of different brands out on the market, and these are gauze dressings that are designed to attract clotting agents. Typically, it's a chemical or material that's embedded in it that creates that. The other thing is direct pressure. Just like we talked about first thing, taking that cloth material and applying it directly over the injury. So if we don't have a tourniquet and it's an arm and a leg, or it's a junctional area, neck, shoulders, and hips, groin area, we're going to take a dressing of some sort. For you, you've got the rolled gauze that's there in front of you. C-Locks Rapid, Kytoflex, Kyto Gauze, and Combat Gauze. Those are brands specifically designed to have a material embedded in them to attract clotting agents. There are different types on the market. I'm more than happy to talk about different options. For the most part, they're more similar than different. It's just slight chemical changes. We had a discussion earlier this morning. The old versions of Quick Clot used to create heat. They no longer make that. The material that was used was zeolite, which is a mineral that would create friction and lead to burns. Now it's been replaced, or several years ago, been replaced with kaolin, which is a clay-based product and does not generate that heat. So if you had old school stuff, it's well past expiration date, so you shouldn't be using it anyway. But if you happen to come across it in some like military supply catalog, don't use it, because what will end up happening is you'll burn the person that you're trying to save. So just something to be aware of there. With wound packing, it's a little different than tourniquet application. Tourniquets, we were placing over clothing, weren't we? Right? We checked pockets, but we're placing it over top. With the wound packing, it's a little different. I need to find where the source is and address it directly. So to that end, I'm going to remove some clothing. I'm going to expose the area, possibly even taking some of this and sponging off so I can see what's actually happening. Once I've done that, I'm going to pack the wound. I'm going to introduce some gauze or hemostatic dressing inside of the wound. Now, I'll tell you, first and foremost, this was a big point of contention when I would go to the EMS symposium and I'd present and I'd say, hey, look guys, here's what we're going to do. You got this hole in the body. We're going to place the item inside. And the automatic response is, that's dangerous. It's not clean. It's not sterile. You're going to end up introducing bacteria and debris into the wound. And I was like, that is such a great point. Let me counter. What caused the injury? Was that sterile? And they're like, well, no. I said, valid. What happens when they get to the emergency room? They're going to flush it, clean it, debride it, which is cutting away damaged tissue, and they're going to flood the body with antibiotics. So what am I doing that's going to make the situation worse? And they didn't have a response. Even the guy with the huge fire mustache and 30 years in the fire service would just kind of humph. So what we're talking about is the top image. Here's the problem as it, and some of you, depending on how long ago you went through American Red Cross, American Heart Association first aid training, right? We see this horrible gash, here. Inside of the Tactical Trauma Training Device Patent Pending, I want you to visualize this is the vessel, right? This is the pathway we want to seal off. So what I was taught and what I would teach in American Heart Association or Red Cross First Aid is this. Hey, horrible injury, right? Chuck in the warehouse, got lacerated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this gauze, I'm going to place it right over top of that. Do you see a problem with this solution? Right? This is the vessel. Can you still see daylight at the other end? All right, so not a problem. Here in American Heart Association and Red Cross First Aid, we came up with a solution. You're going to take more and place it on top.
Don't remove the bottom either.
Yep, don't remove the bottom. Oh, you know what? It's still bleeding through. Here we go. We're going to take another one. Do you see a problem with this solution?
It's not a solution.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're doing is we're recognizing where the damage is, and we're like the little boy in the dike, right? You see a hole? We're going to place our finger in there. Difference is, in this scenario, we're going to take that gauze and we're going to insert it inside. So think of it this way. This is that wound that I did not have a tourniquet for, but I have gauze. So it's here in the arm. Which direction would I pack? So if the pump, the heart is here, which direction do I want to pack? Towards, right? Exactly. I want to pack towards, because this is where the flow comes from. So I want to pack against the flow. So to that end, we're going to locate it. So there might be some clothing here I need to expose. It's why one of the good things to carry in a first aid kit are trauma shears. You know, things that will cut through the clothing material. For those who are unaware, trauma shears will cut a dime and a penny. We stopped telling EMT students that because then they would spend the next 20 minutes in class, right, destroying their shears, but it does work. I bring that up because depending on the injury and the gender of the person you're dealing with, they might be wearing a bra with an underwire that you need to then remove. It'll cut through that. If you were responding to law enforcement or somebody who might be wearing body armor, it can, with a lot of motivation, cut through Kevlar. I would strongly discourage you from trying. Body armor is designed with much easier release points that make a heck of a lot more sense to go to and just unvelcro than try and cut through all of that. So again, depending on your audience and who you might provide and care for, it's just that little bit of education. So with the wound packing, we're going to find it, expose it, and we're going to start packing directly into it. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to demonstrate for you what we're going to do, and then you're going to practice with a partner. To that end, you've got several different things in front of you. You've got your tourniquet, which you could practice, but in this scenario, once again, if it's an arm and leg, we do not have a tourniquet. We're going to pack it, and then we're going to dress it. So what I want you to do is just lend me your attention here for a second, right? Because this is where the magic happens. So I've got this appendage here. I'm going to go ahead. Actually, I'm going to borrow somebody. Yeah, we'll grab somebody on the end. And Tony already got picked on here, so once. All right, so this is how it's going to work. You're going to place it underneath the arm. You're going to work with a partner. So he's got this horrific appendage injury. I don't have a tourniquet, so here's what we're going to do. I suggest when you're working with rolled gauze, roll up, start almost like a little knot. You're going to insert that in and push in which direction? Towards the heart. So at this point, you're going to maintain pressure. Here's the problem people run into is they put it in and they pull out. Well, if that body's under pressure and the blood's pushing, what's it pushing out? Yeah, so I need to go ahead. I create almost like an anchor point, a little knot. I get in there, and at that point, it's just finger over finger, hand over hand, and I'm controlling what I'm doing, right? I'm going to fill this gap to the point where it will dome outside of the tissue. I don't want to have cavitation. If it's still a divot, I need to put more in. Now, when I say that, it's a cautionary tale, because is this tissue already damaged? It's torn. If I put too much pressure, what could I end up doing? I could make it worse, right? So you've got to recognize, okay, I'm not going to just shoehorn it in there, right? So I reach that point, it's really now, it's pushing out. What do I do with the extra? Yeah, I could wrap it, or if he's so conscious, hey, I need you to take that hand, put direct pressure right there. Now, I'm not going to leave him in said state, so we're going to move on to this additional item. All right? Somebody packed mine backwards. It's all right. Blame the owner. So, what we're going to be working with is Israeli trauma dressing. All right? How many of you have ever worked with an ACE bandage? All right? So, what we've got here is an ACE bandage combined with a trauma dressing, a pad of gauze. Now, you'll notice this weird little plastic ear thing. We're going to talk about that here in a moment. How many of you are foreign military? So those who aren't, let me exemplify the intelligence of our military, me included, is that they assume that all of us are probably the lowest level of education, i.e. 6th grade. So if we're unsure of what to do, they label everything. So on this it says other side to wound. So if you opened up the package and you lost the package, because the directions are on the package as well, you can look at this and go, oh, okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this white pad, place it directly over top of the injury. Now, watch what I do. You see that plastic ear? I've just popped it in there, and it's a buckle. I'm going to stretch and come back over top. And that's going to lock it into place. From here, you'll notice there's some gauze poking out on the sides. I want to protect that. So I'm going to stretch and wrap. Stretch and wrap. I know I talk really loud. Are you okay?
I'm cool.
Okay. I can't hear out of this here anyway. Stretch and wrap. Stretch and... Now it just seems weird if I whisper, so let's not do that. All right. There we go. So what's the one thing, the minute you open a package of ACE wrap, you lose all the time? The little clip. So here's what they did. They recognized that that always happens, so they attached it. So you have these little shepherd hooks. All you're going to do is grab some excess material, clip it, find a little more excess material somewhere, and then just clip it on the other side and you're done. All right, I'll take that from you for a second. So at the end of the day, you should see that the gauze is all protected. Nothing's exposed. Can you see daylight at the other side of the tunnel? No. That's what I want to see. So how it's going to work, you're going to work with your partners, and you're going to do exactly what I just did. All right? So you go ahead, take your tactical trauma training device, patent pending. One of you is going to play patient. So if you've got an odd man, take one arm in either side. So you're going to stand up and deal with them on either side. You can stand up, yeah, do whatever. Choose your own adventure. All right, so once you've got that wound packed and dressed, raise your hand. I'll come by and I'll check your work.
I'm assuming this is a painless process for the person getting stuff stuffed in there.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, question was asked, am I going to hurt them by packing a hole in their body with gauze? Yeah, and again, it's just one of those things that we've got to recognize. What is the greater good?
The paramedic will give you medication.
Yeah, there you go. Lie to them. Yeah. Yeah, the paramedic's going to give you painkillers. Snicker, snicker.
That's only in a war movie. Can I do this part too, or yes?
Yes. Yep. Now, he's got a free hand while you're figuring out that dressing. There you go. Have him hold that gauze in place. There you go. So make sure it's snug. You're going back through the plastic clip. All right, who's the patient and who's the practitioner?
Go ahead, take it.
No, you keep working, keep working. So I'm going to give you a help for a second. That way, that gives you a little bit more manageability. All right, so once you've provided your patient care and treatment, good. All right.
Sorry, brother.
How are you feeling?
Good.
You're the patient?
Yes.
Did he save you?
Yes.
All right, that's all that matters. There you go. All right, go ahead. Switch it up.
Can I see daylight too?
No,
All right. Did she save you?
I think so.
You think so, or you know so? Oh, that's some hesitancy there. Could be a relationship issue. All right. Looking good. All right. How are we doing? Yeah, you're going to unpack and then swap it over. Ideally, we get both clips secured. The reality is, if as long as you get one in place, it's going to stay. You know, for those who didn't notice, you know, it took some effort for me to get them unclipped because these are like fishing hooks. They're actually designed to catch. So you've got to really kind of finagle it to even get it to unlatch. So if you get one side, it's going to do the job. All right, keep working. No, that was a good job. You guys both have got this locked in, so good work there.
manage each other a lot.
I like to assume that it's training. All right, looks good. How do you feel?
Pretty good.
Yeah? Did you save his life?
I
Oh, well,
think
that's...
I might make it. It's good to see you again, Matt.
Yeah, it's good to see you.
A lot of fun with that vehicle ambush course.
Yeah?
I
Oh,
brought
good.
along Michelle so she can enjoy it too.
Yeah, you know, today I think it'll be some fun drills this afternoon after lunch. And at least it feels like it's warming up a little bit, so it won't be too bad. Oh, I was eating at an Italian restaurant and it was on the men's room wall. Yeah. No, it's proleator and preceptor, fighter and teacher. All right, well, everybody's kind of finishing up, saving lives. Are there any questions with that? So, wound packing, if I don't have a tourniquet, is arms and legs. If I did have a tourniquet, so I had this horrific wound, and I placed the tourniquet, and let's say, well, you know what, I'm still waiting for the rescue squad. Could I still do this? Yeah, most definitely. I'm still protecting the injury. All right, there's nothing wrong with going, okay, he's got the tourniquet on. Whew, I got that done, and I'm still pretty pumped. Oh, I have these supplies. Why don't I go ahead and treat them? All right. If I didn't have a tourniquet, then obviously this is my go-to. If this was a junctional area, right, shoulders or hips or even around the neck, this is the way I'm going to go, okay? Because tourniquets aren't going to function in these areas, right? Because tourniquets and joints don't work. There's too much movement. You're just not going to be able to secure it. And obviously, airway is not something we want to compromise with a tourniquet. So, we did all of that. What about bleeding in children? Because we've already addressed some of us here have children, or small children in particular. The techniques that you've worked on, tourniquets, wound packing, direct pressure, those all work for children. In fact, majority of the time, direct pressure, wound packing, and dressing is going to be enough. Now, some challenge that can arise. These tourniquets are effective as long as there's material to anchor to. If you were dealing with small children, for me, my son, who's now 6'2" and 200 some pounds, but when he was like 6 years of age, people question whether or not we fed him. And we fed him all the time. But is incredibly thin. If I were to place that around his arm, I would not have enough real estate to anchor. So, if it was a traumatic injury, does that mean this tourniquet doesn't work in that situation? So, improvisation, that's that dangerous, dirty word, right? But you're exactly right. So here's the thing. We're going to envision, if you will, that my wrist is that leg. So, since I don't have enough real estate, but I have something like gauze, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to attach that gauze and place it underneath the tourniquet. So now I have enough real estate to anchor, and I can still go through that same process. For those who are nerdy like me, I can actually share with you the Use of Sam article where they actually tested it out on their model. One of the things they use is like a Doppler radar device, and so they tried it. This technique is in particular practice with canines. So for those who are dog handlers, the four legs of dogs are very narrow, and that was one of the challenges. If the forelegs got injured, could we tourniquet it? And so that's what the process came about, and yes, they were able to utilize gauze to widen up the area. But for the most part with kids, just packing the wounds is going to be good enough. Now, chest injuries. This is the last area of the body that we really didn't address. We did arms, legs, the junctional areas. Now we're going to talk about the box. So with the box, I want you to think about a tire. If a tire got a hole in it, what would you do? Plug it, right? You patch it. That's the goal. In the tire scenario, we want to prevent air from coming out. In this situation, we want to prevent bad air from going in. For those who are unfamiliar, the respiratory system, when you take a breath, your diaphragm contracts, creates a vacuum. That's what pulls the air in through your mouth and your nose. If you have extra holes, guess what? It's going to pull air in through those, and that's bad because that's not how we were designed. What we're concerned about is what's called a tension pneumothorax. That's a fancy Latin word for buildup of pressure in the chest. Tension, pressure, pneumo, air, thorax, thoracic cavity. So you've just got bad air building in. You'll also hear the term sucking chest wound. Why? That's a great question, because it sucks to get one. Ba-dum-bum. It's before lunch, you know, low blood sugar, that's the joke. So, to that end, this is what we're talking about. So we've got this individual who was puncture wounds. These are knife wounds underneath the left armpit. What ends up happening, this is the healthy inflated lung. This is an uninflated lung. So between the ribs, the knife punctured and actually punctured what's called a pleural sac. Think of it as a plastic bag that encapsulates your lungs, your heart. So when that was punctured, every time this person took a breath, air was sucked into this hole. Didn't go into the lung, so it filled this space. The more it filled, the less the lung could expand. So the more breaths they took, because they can't breathe, right? Only one lung's functioning. The more breaths they took, the more bad air came in, the more the space filled, and the less the lung functioned till it collapsed. Now, here's an actual example of a sucking chest wound because air is being sucked into this hole. For those who are unfamiliar, a 30 millimeter recoilless rifle round, if it strikes a human body in effective range, it's called pink mist. There's not much that's left. This individual was at the extent of the maximum range. So the round punctured and stuck. And it was a miracle. You're going to see that the patient is conscious. You're going to notice a little item here kind of fluttering in and out. I'll let you guess on what that is. And I want you to notice the sounds. You're going to hear a mechanical whir. That's just because it's a field hospital. But I want you to listen for the sucking sound. So what do you think that is? That's the heart. And you're going to see the patient's conscious throughout the ordeal. Now, granted, he's probably thinking some pretty ridiculous thoughts, but the patient did survive. Now, this plastic shield, notice that you can see it being sucked into the body. It's under suction, but it's preventing that air from getting in. So that's what we're talking about with the sucking chest wound. So like the tire analogy, we're going to prevent air from getting into that space. Here's the thing I want you to be aware of, and this is something when I worked with one of our local trauma surgeons in the Winchester, Virginia area. He's like, Matt, if you can get the patient to me in less than 20 minutes, you could do nothing for a sucking chest wound and they're going to be okay. I shouldn't say okay, it's survivable. Because sucking chest wound, as horrible as that looked, right? You're like, I saw that dude's heart. You know, did you see any bleeding? No, other than the initial injury site, you know, was the dried blood there, very little to no bleeding. Okay, so blood loss was not a major concern. So it was just the air building in that space, bless you, collapsing the lung. Now, here's the reality. You will encounter throughout your life people with only one functioning lung. And you may or may not be aware of that. So having one lung doesn't mean they die, but it's a cumulative effect. So what ends up happening, bless you, that's your last one. All right. As the air builds and builds, your heart is here in the center of your chest. What's going to happen is the injured side will start filling with air and it'll push the heart to the uninjured side. So that's going to accomplish several negative things. One, the vessels that run from the heart into the brain, carotid arteries. I want you to visualize if you were to take a garden hose, turn it on and kink it, what happens to the flow of water? It stops. So when the heart starts moving, the carotid arteries will start to kink, which means blood isn't going upstairs. So that's creating a problem. Blood builds up, the pressure builds up, comes back into the heart. Plus, as the heart moves to the uninjured lung, the lung can't expand like it used to, and that'll eventually collapse as well. So it's a cumulative effect. That's why they were saying you're not going to die right away. As horrible as that injury looked, you're like, holy cow, how are you conscious? He survived it, you know, lived on past that moment in time. In the field, you could get away with 10, 15 minutes. This isn't like a 3-minute problem like what we had with the femoral arteries or carotid arteries. So be aware. But we want to be able to do something. So to that end, you saw that there was that piece of plastic over the hole, right? That was the patch. By a show of hands, how many of you have ever applied a sticker to something? So we're going to take a skill set you already possess and we're going to build upon that. The idea is you find the hole, you're going to expose that area, and you're going to patch it. So there are several different options that are out there. These are just two examples. Have you ever worked with a glue mousetrap? Are you familiar with what one is? Yes. All right. For those who aren't, it's essentially a piece of material with incredibly sticky glue on it. So these chest seals, these are two examples, are essentially that same thing. It's a piece of plastic with really sticky glue on it because I've got to be able to stick it to somebody who might have a lot of body hair and blood and sweat on them. So with all of that, I'm going to find the site. So to do that, there are several different processes, if you will. I could cut the clothing, right, which is the same thing we talked about when exposing those junctional areas to pack a wound. Why would that be imperative for the chest, exposing the wound?
For me, I'm going to look for an exit wound.
Okay, so yeah, there's an entry wound, exit wound, a lot of penetrating trauma, good point. All right.
You're really not going to have pooling of blood.
Yeah, it's whereas a junctional area up here in the shoulders and the hips, I could end up hitting a major vessel and you're going to see a lot of pooling of blood. But what did we notice with the guy who had the big ass hole in his chest? No, very little to no bleeding. So, things to think about. When we start talking about active shooter incidents, which is the focus of today, right? What is the typical human response if something bad is coming towards them? You know, to turn away, get into a defensive stance. How many of you watch the crime shows and like the victim had defensive wounds? Victim had defensive wounds, right? Because your hands come up to protect. Same thing with ballistic injuries. Well, here's the thing. If I get shot, where's the biggest part of my body? Yeah, center mass. On the military side, we stressed arms and legs. Why? Because what was the military wearing in a combat environment? Body armor. So the injuries to the chest were less than the injuries to the arms and the legs. On the civilian side, where people aren't wearing body armor on a regular basis, what's the largest area of the body? This. So when we start talking about active shooter incidents, we're seeing a higher prevalence of injuries to this area as opposed to these. So to that end, we need to recognize I'm unarmed, I see the gun, I'm here, I get hit, I go to the ground. You might not pick up on where that hole is. So when we go through our process, mechanism of injury, gunshot wound, so I'm going to look for holes in the body. How would I do that? Yeah, I'm going to expose, and then from there, knowing that it might just be a small hole, or depending on what the injury site was, it might be a sliver. I've got a rake across the body, what we call a blood rake. So what I want you to do is you're going to hold your hands up, kind of space your fingers apart, all right, and then just give me a roar. Ah! Is how I entertain myself. So, but what you're going to do is a methodically process what you're doing. Meaning, I'm going to come from left to right, front to back. The idea is, I don't want you to do a little bit here, and then a little bit here, and a little bit there. You're going to miss things. All right? Like Mike had already mentioned, if you have a ballistic trauma, if you have an entry wound, there's more than likely an exit wound. Of the two, which is usually larger? Exit wound, because all the material that's in front of the bullet gets pushed out ahead of the bullet. So with that, when you rake across the body, here's what we're looking for. Look at the line of my buttons right now. Everything's in line, yes? But the minute the skin comes under tension and I pull, what do you notice happens between the buttons? You start actually seeing the holes. That's what we're doing with the tissue of the human body, right? As we stretch it, it's going to make it prevalent. Oh, wow, there's a hole there. Or it could just be dumb luck where the finger drops in and it was like, I don't think they were designed with that. All right, and that clues me in. And at that point, once we identify where the hole or holes are, then we're going to take those magic stickers and we're going to apply them. So come on up here for a second. You can just kind of gather around. Because here's the reality. If I let you put real chest seals on each other, whatever you were wearing would be ruined forever because this glue does not come off. So here's what I want you to be aware of. When you find the hole, all right, let's just for sake of demonstration, this is on the chest, all right? I want you to peel the sticker halfway, center it, and then apply it. Because here's the problem. If you try and pull it off quickly, and you're like, hold on, and then I gotta, ouch, 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 and then I gotta try and undo this and then apply it, all right? So be methodical with the process. Now, I'm gonna borrow you for a second, sir. The chest seals that you're using, the improvised chest seals, this is contact paper. Anybody have pets at home? Yeah. Or are familiar with pets? You know, and their accompanying fur. So if you have those strips that pull the fur off, all this is going to do is pull off any lint from you. Okay? So in this situation, I'm going to say the center of his pee is the hole. So I raked across the body, I found it. I'm going to peel the chest seal halfway, here, and we're done. Was that overly complex? No. But my class Stop the Bleed version is one of the few that actually has that included. And again, there's no scientific mystery to applying a sticker to a hole. So what I've got is a couple. There's some larger ones, some smaller ones. Those you can use. These are trainers. They'll stick and they'll actually come off. So you've got these different ones available. So find a partner, you know, make sure you get consent, and then you can go ahead and apply, you know, a sticker to them.
So do these come in regular trauma kits, or can you buy these separately?
So, great question. Here's an example. Typically what we'll see with these seals is they'll come in a 2-pack, and that's what you're dealing with. You know, 2 relatively large stickers. What's nice is that entry wound, exit wound, but what if there are multiple perforations? Well, here's the thing. What's this made out of? Yeah. And what's the backing made out of?
Also sticky.
Yeah, so, well, not as, but plastic. So you have other options as long as you have something that will allow it to adhere. So one of the things I encourage in first aid kits is what I always carry is a roll of duct tape. For me, because I stay in hotels way too often, no, Brian, I love them though, but thanks. Is that I'll have these floating around. I'll take about 3 to 5 yards of duct tape, and I'll have these in my first aid kits, in my glove box. I was actually in Dakar, Senegal, and the old Land Cruiser we were using, one of the water hoses burst, and I was like, oh shit, here we go. And I just plugged it up, and then we pumped a bunch of bottles of water in there, and we were able to limp our way back. Here's the thing when it comes to first aid, is duct tape sticks. It is airtight. Also, is just a weird side note, the glue has antimicrobial properties. The glue kills bacteria. It wasn't designed for that, it's just one of those weird side effects.
Probably pulls it all off.
I don't know if it microbes you pull off. Yeah.
It burns well too. Do you ever use the stickies for arms or legs?
Sucking arm wound, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, no. For the most part, the occlusive dressings are focused on the box. There really aren't issues that I would go to that because it will probably create more problems than solve. And it'll start to come through the valve and it crusts and dries and it seals up anyway. So in theory, the valves are a great idea, but in practice, they tend to booger up anyway. So if you get one, great, but I wouldn't spend the extra money for that, I guess is my point. All right, any questions on the seals? The last thing I want to cover is just if you're exposed to blood, first and foremost, if you get blood on you, wash it off, soap and water. Inform the medical providers, so that rescue squad, let them know, hey, I got this person's blood on me. They're going to get your information. One of the things that happens when people are admitted is they get evaluated, tested. Hey, does this person have bloodborne pathogens? Are they contagious? Anything like that? And if they have your information, they can share that with you. You know, hey, you need to be tested for blah, blah, blah. Or everything's hunky-dory, you're fine. All right. So here are some examples of individual first aid kits. This is just from me to you, an idea of if you were going to carry an individual kit, these are some items I would suggest having in there. I do not focus so much on what the packaging material is. I'll be honest, this was my old agency issued these out to us, which is the only reason why I have a buttload of them. But that's like a $100 Cordura nylon aerosol rated pouch, which is cool. If you're going to jump out of an airplane and you're going to hump across a mountain range, you know, off Stinkistan. But if it's going in the back of your Sienna van, you don't need to spend $100 on a pouch. You know, instead, this is a 75-cent pencil case from Walmart, and I just pack it with the essentials, and now I can throw that into my glove box in my vehicle and my backpack as I go hiking. How many of you are hunters? So one of the groups I used to work for was a company called Triple Canopy, and we were teaching high threat protection, worldwide protection course. Anyway, one of the guys I taught with used to share a story before I'd teach the first aid portion. He's like, hey guys, we're going to issue you these first aid kits. Don't just take them overseas. He's like, you know, my dad and I, now this guy is a retired Force Recon Marine, so at that time he was probably in his mid-50s. He and his father would go hunting, and they had some family property, It took them, they trucked in their four-wheelers, and then from the parking area to where they hunted was about another 45-minute trek on four-wheelers. So they were in God's country. And he shared the story. So this guy's in his 50s, his dad's in his 70s. They're out there, they start climbing up the tree stand, right? And we know tree stands, well, those steps were pretty secure last season. They got about halfway up, pulled away, he fell to the ground. Well, unfortunately for him, there was a metal picket from an old cattle fence underneath. It caught him right between the legs and kept him elevated about 6 inches off the ground. So, for those who were unsure, the male gender was not designed with a hole in that area. So he was able, with his dad's assistance, to get off the picket, and then from there he dove into his first aid kit and just started packing the wound. Thankfully, they were able to get to a point where which they could contact emergency services and get him treated. He survived the injury, obviously, or I wouldn't tell the story. And as a side note, we tried to change his call sign to Scarecrow, but that was shot down. But I bring this up because we spend so many times doing things out of doors or traveling, and it's good to have these items. If you are creating a first aid kit for your vehicle, I would be a little bit more involved with that because, again, it's not something I have to carry with me and lug each and every place. Also, how many people are you typically transporting? If it's you and your spouse and a couple kids, it would probably make sense to be prepared for the worst case scenario where everybody received an injury. So we want to have supplies accordingly. Some of this stuff you might have questions on, like why do you have chemical lights and headlamps? Because the bad things only happen during daylight hours. No. Yeah, exactly. And so things like space blankets, you know, especially right now. What happened on 95 a couple days ago? Right? And they were 20 minutes from D.C., the capital of the United States, and they were stranded in their vehicles overnight. You know, how many of them actually had something that was available? How many of them were like on E and pretty much screwed the minute that thing shut down?
How many of those were driving electric vehicles and you can't just pour a can of gas and start it up again?
Yeah, there you go. Yes? Oh, nasopharyngeal airway. So that's an nasal airway, a nose hose. So what this is designed to do is to go into the nostril. If you have an unconscious patient, one of the biggest challenges is somebody who's unconscious, their tongue will fall to the back of their throat and block their airway. So an oral airway, it could create a gag reflex. Even somebody who's unconscious could start gagging and choking. Whereas a nasal, one that goes through the nose, 28 French, that's what the 28F is more or less a universal size and will fit most people. Whereas an oral appliance is very particular to an individual. In this room, we have 4, 8, 13 people. I'd probably need, at a minimum, 8 or 9 different sizes of oral appliance, whereas I could probably get away with 10 of these and maybe 2 smaller ones. So, just something to be aware of. That is a basic skill, meaning that if you had a basic level of EMT training, you'd have the ability to put something in somebody's nose. If you're looking for supplies, these are websites I suggest. Anything beyond that, Amazon, eBay, I would strongly avoid. There are a prevalence of counterfeit tourniquets that are on the market. And unless you really detail-oriented, you won't know the difference. And you end up expecting a device to save your life that was not designed for it. So tourniquets, the ones you work today, typically they retail for about $25. You might find a deal for $20, but anything below that, I would seriously question the validity of the equipment. All right, so in summary, ensure your own safety, alert, bleeding, compression. We talked about how to do that. packing wounds, tourniquets, so on and so forth. Any questions on anything we covered? All right, so stopthebleed.org. They also have some resources if you were looking for individual first aid kits, and then my website there. And this is just a final quote. It kind of really surmises the training itself. Nothing more tragic than death other than one that could have been prevented. And that's it. So, any questions on anything we went over this morning? Okay, so what we'll do is we'll break for lunch. 1 o'clock at the range. So if you, do you share with everybody where that is, or?
Yeah,